General Robert E. Lee once said, "A land without memories is a people without freedom." We would go a step further and say that a people without memories is a people who doesn't know who they are today. Since the cannons cooled at Appomattox, we of the South have been taught to despise our past. The Yankee set out on a mission of peace with the goal of conquest to reshape the Southerner in his image, to change our vocabulary, enlighten us with their morality, and force our children to remember a history that is not their own.
Welcome to Charlie Horse Radio, a conversational podcast on Southern history and culture, which has for its goal restoring the memory and freedom of this land. We are Jason and John, two Orthodox Christians with a love for the South. If you enjoy this show and would like to support, please consider subscribing on Substack for free or for $5 a month or $50 a year.
Well, you're going to pull those pistols and whistle Dixie. After I get to liking someone, they ain't around long.
I notice when you get to disliking someone, they ain't around for long either.
Pretty sure we have time to bury them fellas.
Hell with them fellas. Buzzards gotta eat, same as worms.
At one time, not inconceivably long ago, the ordinary layman, or even the extraordinary one who took up the mysteries as a gentlemanly pursuit, had an impressive respect for the professional man of religion, who, for some reason not clear to 1930, had authority to speak of the higher things. We have none of that respect now. The present writer, who is a layman of the more ordinary kind, is deficient in it. There is a priest here and there, even a Protestant clergyman or two, who as individuals seem to speak from the tripod, but they hardly, from the viewpoint of some fine past, represent their class. They are only laymen of the more extraordinary kind. So I begin an essay on religion with almost no humility at all. That is to say, I begin it in a spirit of irreligion and without apology to those who know better, for there seems to be none, as a class, who have that high qualification. And this is a matter of deep regret, for one will have to think for oneself, a responsibility intolerable to the religious mind, whose proper business is to prepare the mysteries for others. This I cannot pretend to do. End quote. And that is the first paragraph of essay number 6 in I'll Take My Stand. This one's called Remarks on the Southern Religion by Alan Tate. So welcome to Charlie Horse Radio. This is we're at the halfway point now. So this is 6 of 12. So I'm here with John. How's it going, John?
Howdy, y'all.
And our guest today is Father Nikolai Meyers of Saints Peter and Paul in Topeka, Kansas. And so since John and I are both Orthodox Christians, and this is a essay on religion, we figured it would be appropriate to get an actual priest on to talk about it. And he's not just any priest, he's my own spiritual father. So welcome, Father Nikolai.
Thank you guys for having me. It's very, very kind of you to ask.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say for introduction before we get going?
I can't say I'm a Southerner. I am a Southern Californian, though. Those are not the same, of course.
Well, I'm not really a Southerner either, so yeah, you're in good company.
I did live in Memphis, Tennessee for 6 years. As my first assignment as a priest, I was the assistant pastor at St. John's Orthodox Church in Memphis, and I was then also in charge of our mission, which is now a church, St. Paul's Orthodox Church in Tupelo, Mississippi. So I did that circuit for 6 years, back and forth from Tupelo to Memphis. And so I have spent time in the South and have some experience, but then, I went to Yankee Land and after that and spent almost 5 years in upstate New York. So before coming to Kansas. So
Yeah.
I have children born in the South and children born in the North. So I guess, my house is a continual civil war.
Yeah. Hopefully it doesn't get as bloody as ours.
Yeah. No. So no, it can be violent at times. I have 4 boys, and 3 girls. So, all the boys came together, one after another. So, two are born in Memphis and 2 are born in Rome, New York. So, yeah, so there's some internal conflict there, but
Yeah.
but we strive for peace in the house. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And how's the building going? Like the parish just moved into a new building, right?
We rented a new location because our old building was just too small. So we're set up for a few years there while we're trying to get everything done to build our future hall. So yeah, there's a lot of irons in the fire.
Yeah.
So I'm also in charge of our community in Manhattan, Kansas, St. Mary Magdalene Chapel, and they're growing too. So a lot happening.
Yeah.
So, and though we're in Kansas and it's the plains, we did, because of Fort Riley being so close by, we have a lot of people from all over the country in this area, and because Manhattan is the home of Kansas State University, we have people from all around the world as well as all over the country that come there. So,
Yeah.
the cosmopolitan place in the middle of the country and flyover country.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we noticed the same thing here at St. James in Stillwater because it's a college town too. So,
yeah.
We see a lot of students that come in and stay for a few years and then they leave. There's a lot of turnover for that reason.
Yeah. No. But yeah. So the Alan Tate is a very interesting gentleman.
Yeah.
He is.
Yeah. Agreed.
Very interesting.
Now, I had one kind of opening remark to make. When we did the biographical, the very first episode, many weeks ago now, I mentioned that Alan Tate converted to Roman Catholicism, and he did. But that was not until later in his life. And when he wrote this essay, he was actually a womanizer, an adulterer, and he may have been an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And I have it on the testimony of one of the foremost scholars on the Southern Agrarians that the other agrarians actually regretted that Alan Tate was the one assigned to write this essay because of the life that he was living at the time. So when I first read it, the essay just kind of was, I don't know, it wasn't bad, obviously, because he's a good author, but it was just kind of okay. And I think in that first paragraph, he says that he comes to this topic with no humility at all. And from a spirit of irreligion, I mean, he kind of admits that he's coming to it from that position, but that is some important, I think, groundwork to lay with this essay.
Yeah.
That he was not a Christian.
No, he wasn't. But even his acknowledgement of his position that he is irreligious and he has no humility is actually a humble expression of honesty.
Yeah.
So,
he almost sounded depressed to me. Like I got depression from the intro to this, like he sounds like he's sad that he has no religion,
Yeah.
And in the sense that also that he's looking at it as a scholar too, that the religion of the South he feels is just lost. That there's something that's not there anymore. And I think his diagnosis of the problem is pretty accurate. And is in line with a lot of other people's kind of diagnosis of the modern world, the commodification of everything, the mechanization of everything, the detachment from place, right? He makes all these points in his essay. Mm-hmm. as well, and as well as the emphasis on the scientific or the materialistic mind. His whole discussion of the horse and the half horse, and is basically pointing that out, that we've taken only kind of half of the thing, and by doing so you kill it.
Right.
That everything is materialistically perceived, based on observation, the scientific kind of approach, and that has a deadening, a sterilizing, right? There's an analogy that Orthodox people often use, that I've heard for a long time. It's like, how do you understand what a tree is? One approach is to cut it down, dissect it, measure it, weigh it, incinerate it, find out its chemical composition, right? And basically analyze it, but in the process you destroy it, right? The other way to know a tree is to have a picnic under it, to hang a rope from it, put a tire swing on it, right? To live with it, and that's kind of what he's pointing to, is that difference in understanding a thing, and that religion, by and large, does the latter. It has the picnic under the tree and hangs a rope and has a swing and lives with the thing, right? It doesn't, at least traditionally, a religion doesn't have the perspective that somehow we're going to be able to perfect life in this world wholly. That there's always going to be problems and difficulties and things. There's no utopian stream in traditional Christian religion, or in any other kind of traditional religions. Whether it's the Hindu, the Buddhist, or even the Muslim strains of religious thought, right? They don't have a utopian dream. Is really solely a Western European kind of Western culture kind of invention of the post medieval period. That we can somehow make everything perfect or better. Whereas traditionally you look at things and you have to live with the problems, right? You have to there are ways, like religion is the way that you're dealing with it, right? And coping with it, but the ultimate redemption of everything, right, is always later in the next life, or what is to come, right? You can do only so much here, which can be a lot, but it's not. Everything's not here in this material world. That there's always this transcendent kind of something coming next, right? Whereas the materialist view, there is nothing transcendent, and therefore everything has to be crammed into the present. We have to make the utopian kind of ideal. We have to be on the crusade to accomplish right now, whoever's idea of what perfect is. And he's, critiquing that or pointing that out in this essay, which is, falls in line with a lot of other folks who see that same problem in modernity, right? Whether that you go from Wendell Berry to Paul Kingsnorth, Protestant and Orthodox kind of agrarians, and in that kind of circle, it's all the same critique.
Yes. And Richard Weaver on that topic of the way that empiricism kind of
sees it as
empiricism was kind of the guiding doctrine of the North in the antebellum and then the postbellum era of America. But Richard Weaver says, quote, and the practice of judging men's actions by divine deliverance or by any code superior to what he himself could frame was fast vanishing. Southern writers tried as best they could to point out the dangers in this rising tide of empiricism. And he ties all that into the industrialism of the North, which is, of course, founded on the idea that really the rejection of anything divine, that we can make the world into whatever we want it to be without God.
Yeah. But I would say that was particularly a Puritan strain of thought, whereas United States is much more complicated than it having two, in a sense, kind of options here. Because you have, but the problem is, though, is the Puritan strain of thought is really dominant. It dominates the elites, the educational class, and so forth in the North.
Yes.
Whereas in the South, you have multiple kind of cultures there that are similar and complementary to one another, but you have a southern coastal kind of culture that is your what does he call it? The second and third sons of nobility who come over and bring the manor house and that kind of culture with them.
Yeah, kind of Albion Seed type of understanding of history.
Yeah, I've read Albion Seed and find it fascinating. So, but you have it's interesting. You have when I lived in upstate New York, after I had lived in the South, I saw more Confederate flags and "Don't Tread on Me" flags in upstate New York than I did in the South.
Wow.
Because, if you look at an electoral map of New York State, it's mostly red. It's the city, which is New York, right?
Right.
That's blue. The city's blue. Albany is blue. Syracuse is blue. These concentrated pockets, but the rest of the countryside is all red. If they vote Republican, and so you have an urban rural kind of conflict going on, not just north south, but it's I think it's the whole country basically. It's really more of that's really more of the divide,
right?
Whereas the urban is dominated by, in a sense, the Puritan mindset, and then everybody else kind of lives out in the country, and even the kind of Midwestern spirit is definitely not exactly the same as the South, but it's more complementary.
It is
a lot more, that Midwestern kind of spirit.
Well, you can see the same thing going on in Kansas too, like to this day, like going all the way back to the foundation of the state.
Yeah,
you got the blue cities like Lawrence and Topeka, Manhattan, Kansas City, Wichita, and then and they kind of run the politics of the whole state, even though everything else is red.
Yeah, we just had a ballot initiative in the state of Kansas. The Supreme Court is chosen by a select committee set up, by the politicians, basically made up of lawyers who then choose who the Supreme Court judges will be. It's not by popular vote, which is unusual. And so there was a move to change that, go to popular vote for the selection of judges, bringing it in line, and but all of the money, all of the advertising primarily was, no, don't, the things you got in the mail, it was framed as the billionaires buying elections.
Yeah.
Billionaires are going to come in and buy the judges. They're going to buy the judges. So let the system as it is, let the system that is that we've set up, that we say is, nonpartisan, right? Except, the couple of the first things you got in the mail, the return address on it was Planned Parenthood in Olathe, Kansas.
Oh, wow.
So you knew where's the money coming from? You had big money coming in from Planned Parenthood and Democrat, right, money to keep the system in place because it's given them a court that they're favorable towards, right? But the people at large, right? But they put it into a primary election where you get maybe 20-30% of the people of voting population even to vote. That's where they put it. So, even so in Kansas, it's like we're the big abortion provider for this area, for the Midwest, because Oklahoma outlawed it. Nebraska has it limited. Missouri limits it a lot, but the Supreme Court in Kansas found that within the Constitution there's a right to an abortion, even though it doesn't say that.
Yeah, I remember that case.
The Supreme
from
Court read it. The state
back.
Supreme Court read it into it, and therefore created this right. Right? It wasn't ever voted on or anything like that. So, So Kansas has this, very interesting history of the New Englanders coming to set up the state in opposition to slavery, but they also have this tendency of dominance, right? They that kind of Puritan spirit of we know best. Let us tell you how it should be. Therefore let us choose the judges so that the elections can't be bought. But there's this underlying assumption then, well, so elections are bought,
right?
If the judges are getting bought through elections by billionaires, that means all the elections are the same way, right? It's like you can't have one or the other. You can't make this claim, and so what you're saying is all elections are bought by billionaires for whatever race it is, and you had these people with things in their yard that said vote no on changing the Supreme Court, and then it's then another side in their yard, your vote matters,
right?
But by voting no, you're saying your vote isn't needed. So right, but it's in Kansas you have this kind of internal conflict in the state manifesting itself, right? Going all again back to its founding, because it's founded by people from different regions of the country with different assumptions. But I tend to think that the problem largely is in the hubris of the Puritan tradition. And there's problems when they become ascendant and then start to impose, right? Play out their hand too much. And this has happened historically all through, the history of the United States, right? The Puritans can cobble together, the other kind of cultural groups on their side, usually against the coastal Southern culture, as Albion Seed kind of describes it as the kind of the four major cultures. But then everybody eventually gets sick of the Puritans dominating and imposing, and then they switch. And and then you get the coastal Southern culture, the interior kind of Appalachian culture, and the what they call the William Penn, Pennsylvania kind of establishment culture that spreads. All those cultures spread throughout the country, right? Those other three, they usually then coalesce against the Puritans. And that's kind of what we see, I think, that has played out again, right? In our own kind of current situation is you have, that the Democrats have embodied the Puritan kind of spirit, and everybody else got sick of it and kind of have found space in either independence or the Republican Party. That's the kind of the conflict currently. But it's it depends on what's the culture, the cultural heritage that you're kind of embodied or have been taught, right? Is kind of what you then follow, the way you think, right? And so, the cities are dominated by that Puritan tradition, where they're here to set up a city on a hill,
Right.
and show the world what it's like to live right. And we know best. It's the difference is that what they're using to express that utopian idea is no longer the scriptures in any way or Christianity. It's something else that they've chosen, but it's the same kind of cultural pattern expressing itself.
Yeah, it's the same ideology that's just applied to something else.
Yeah.
On when you're talking about the New Englanders coming to Kansas, with the touting abolition and freeing the slaves and whatnot, Lysander Spooner, who is a Massachusetts communist, somebody that none of us would agree with, he wrote his book No Treason, and he criticizes the Lincoln administration and the New England Puritans for exactly that. He's like, well, you guys went to all these other states to go free the slaves, and what did you really do? Your Puritanism drove you to just enslave an entire population. And that's kind of the irony of that Puritan mindset. But, when everybody other than the Puritans are just dangling over the fire, on a spider's web, they conceive that they have the right to dominate. And it's a very difficult ideology to be neighbors with.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah, and then it turns out that whenever somebody does try to resist them, they end up doing it in like a kind of, a way that ends up being ineffective, which is what the Missourians did in Kansas. Like, they resisted it. They used force, basically. And that ends up looking bad. Because the Puritans kind of had the market cornered on propaganda. They're like,
yes,
they had the most effective propaganda, and they were able to spin it as the Missourians being aggressive. And so when they push back in kind of this like lowbrow sort of
savage way,
like a barbaric kind of way almost, nobody sees the fact that they're defending something that matters to them. They see what they're doing, and they see that it looks bad, and they don't like it. Like, it feels icky. But that's kind of what the Puritans end up doing, is they provoke that in people, and then they use the fallout to maintain their moral superiority.
Yeah, they're masters at taking the moral high ground, or defining what the moral high ground is. Right? You're defining, right? You're defining the arena of the conflict itself that you then put your adversary in, right? So how can they win when you've kind of laid out the parameters, but that harkens back to kind of the British colonial system itself, that I think we have to remember is that, the way that the British Empire governed was basically to divide and conquer, to pit groups against each other, and in that way manage their colonies, whether that was Pakistan, India, right? I've a number of people, today, who I've listened to, they talk about wherever the British, wherever they've left, they always leave two groups kind of hating each other, right? And so the temptation for our nation, right? So you have this kind of Puritan tradition, but that's only one aspect of American like culture and history. But in a sense, it embodies in many ways kind of that it's the most, in some ways, the most British in certain regards, whereas the Southern coastal kind of culture is a different expression of British tradition.
Yes,
but it doesn't have that. It's not that part of British or English, maybe we should say, culture that divides and conquers. Right? No one country or empire is monolithic.
Right.
And so kind of the nation as a whole, right, is made up of at least 4 English cultures or British subcultures that then dominate, as well as microcultures throughout, because of the presence of the Dutch, the French, and so forth, and the Spanish. And so, but you have this kind of, the Puritans are one of the dominant ones, and but they're not the first. Jamestown is first. We have to remember, Massachusetts Bay Colony comes later. There's like a 20-year difference roughly between the two. And then of course William Penn's colony in Pennsylvania also comes in, and it's that Quaker tradition that very much expresses much of American society. It's not the Puritan culture, right? The Midwest is populated by people who come from Pennsylvania. If you go back, people, because William Penn let anybody come. We have to remember the Puritans did not let nobility nor the poor come into their colony. It was solely business, middle class establishment. The southern coastal Jamestown, Virginia, that was second and third sons of nobility establishing this plantation system, right? And they're bringing in, peasants or the working class, and there wasn't slavery initially. It was indentured servitude,
right? Or the apprentice system that
apprentices
the South used.
So there's a whole mix there, right, of people in the South, right? Whereas in the Northeast, it's very much this one kind of strata of society, and one kind of very homogeneous kind of religious, kind of outlook, which was a rather in terms of the Protestant Reformation, it's the most extreme.
Yes.
Within that, and that's why you get all the weird stuff coming out of the Northeast, right? The Salem witch trials, right? From that, you have to remember a lot of the Puritan pastors, right? They're detached from any kind of tradition, and they're very, very much creating it as they go. And so, you get the Shakers, the Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, right? They're all coming out of, a lot of them are coming out of New England, upstate New York, that area.
Unitarian Universalists.
Unitarians,
yes,
right? Universalists, right? They're all coming out of this same kind of that region, and then of course they spread across the country to the, usually urban centers, is where they go. But they're taking this very extreme, radical, and that's why they're the ones who first detach themselves from any kind of, again, the scriptures. Like first we don't need tradition of any kind, and then we don't even need scripture, right? And so that's, but because it's a trust in yourself, right? But also they're the ones that dabble in various Kabbalah texts and Eastern mystical texts, right?
There was spiritualism too.
Freemasonry takes hold there first.
Yes.
And it's that kind of variation of things, right? With its emphasis on this kind of general spirituality, not attached to anything, right? And it's very this worldly centered. So, but that's not everywhere. The Quakers in Pennsylvania allow everybody to come in, rich, poor, it doesn't matter. And it's just a much more a culture. It's that American culture where we're going to get along, we're going to help each other, we're going to be neighborly, right? We're going to support each other. Much more focus on practical knowledge, right? The schools that develop out of Penn, that Penn colony, that's where you get your great engineering schools. your ag schools, right? It's in that vein that spreads across the United States and dominates the Midwest, the plains, and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's but it's not a culture that tries to put itself before other people,
Right.
right? Whereas the Puritan kind of culture is, no, I know best. We know best. You need to listen to us, right? It's very much, we need to put ourselves forward. We need to be in charge. And so, but that's a minority within our country, very much. But it's a vocal minority,
Yes.
And then of course
The
the Appalachian culture that runs from north to south, right? Which very much is that upstate New York, don't tread on me, fly your Confederate flag kind of, we've come here to try to live our life, to make something good for ourselves and our children. And, a lot of those people initially came out of, the border between Scotland and England, and their houses had been burned out for, centuries. And it was, they were just trying to get away from the authority.
Mm-hmm.
And again, very much live and let live. But again, they're still a very religious kind of people. But they're still rooted more in the scriptures. They didn't detach themselves from that, just like in the South. They didn't detach themselves from the scriptures.
Right.
And so that anchored them much more than it did kind of that Puritan culture.
I had two quick notes, and I had I think a somewhat of an important question. The first note is that I can't remember the exact quote, but it was very early in American history that northern seminaries were dogmatically becoming Unitarian. Like in the 18th century, they were dogmatically Unitarian, whereas the South stayed very faithfully Trinitarian.
Mm-hmm.
And then another note, which I find very interesting about when you're talking about the Quakers were actually kind of the central point of Thomas Jefferson's defense of religious freedom, because it was the Quakers that were being persecuted by the Puritans and by the some of the Anglicans also.
Yeah.
And he was expressing, he didn't really care about the other people. It was like, you guys need to stop persecuting the Quakers. You need to stop killing them because they're extremely moral, virtuous people that are rooted in the land.
Yeah.
And they uphold this kind of American idealism.
Yeah.
But then the question that I had that I think is important, when the Jamestown immigration wave landed, they actually came with a decree from the King of England that they were here to evangelize to the country, to the Native Americans here. That was kind of their sovereign decree, their divine decree. And the Puritans were, of course, famously fleeing from persecution. So what are the downstream effects culturally that we could expect to see from a people that are fleeing persecution versus people that come here with the goal to evangelize and colonize?
Well, in the history of the nation, right, it's a very mixed kind of interaction, at least with Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think both North and South, you have a mixture of cooperation and kind of living well together in certain areas, and then dominating and basically purging, right? In both.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very kind of sorrowful aspect of American history, where those who are here already largely just get shoved out of the way or killed.
Right.
Eventually. Not always, but eventually. And so I think both have kind of aren't great examples. Because, I think of the example of here in Kansas, you have Baptists who come as well as Methodists to, set up schools for Native Americans, right? And to teach them. But, what are they largely teaching them? It's not so much the gospel message as it is the Western European culture in many ways.
Right.
Right. they go into a place, they set up a church that looks just like a church that would be back home in England, right? Or based on their own confession, whitewashed walls and pews, and and everybody's having to dress in the same kind of garb as European culture and stuff, and they're having to conform themselves culturally, not not necessarily spiritually,
Right.
And so, which is different than, say, how the Russians came to Alaska. The evangelization of Alaskan tribes by the Russian Orthodox was because the Russians intermarried with them.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the impetus. The Russian fur traders came and they married into those clans, those tribes, and they wanted their marriages blessed and their children baptized, and that's why the missionaries were initially sent. And so you have a merging of native and Russian culture through marriage.
Right.
That's not how it worked in the lower 48.
Yeah, that's not an external imposition of culture.
Yeah. So,
well, I would say in the lower 48, it was like much less of a merger and more of an imposition of European culture on the natives through marriage. Because you see a lot of intermarriage there too, especially among the 5 civilized tribes in the South. And by the time of the Civil War, or even by the time of the Trail of Tears, there was the Cherokees were mostly white.
Mm-hmm.
One of the principal chiefs of the Cherokees, John Ross, was 15, 16 Scottish by descent.
Yeah.
And it's that's how it worked, and you weren't seeing the same thing the other way. The natives were not imposing their culture on the whites by marriage in that same way.
Right.
Probably just because there weren't as many of them.
Yeah.
And the Trail of Tears happened after the tribes already became what we call civilized. They were already the civilized tribes by the time of the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
So even the conforming to European culture didn't save them being displaced from their land, being moved across the country and killed in many cases.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a sorrowful part of our history, and not. But at this point, you can't rewrite that, but you have to kind of learn from it and not make the same mistakes again. So, but I guess I can't really. I don't know enough about to really say if there was a clear difference between northern kind of evangelistic and southern evangelistic efforts within the Native American tribes.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, right, I think you have in the South a retention and a development of a Protestant Christian kind of culture, as well as Catholic. As time goes on, the Catholics come in larger numbers, and also even the Orthodox start showing up in the late 19th century. This is post Civil War largely.
Well, this might be a good time to ask this question, because one of the questions we got from one of our listeners was about Orthodoxy in the South, and he says, I don't know any of this history, but he says there was a Greek parish in Galveston, Texas, established about 5 years after the Civil War. So that would have been about 1870.
Yep.
And then there was another one, another Greek parish. He said he thinks it was in New Orleans sometime in the 1850s. And so he's asking how well Orthodoxy was regarded by other people around there at the time, and how well it was what's the what was the reception of it
there was also
at that time.
There was also in Father John Whitford's recent essay, I believe it was his essay, he talked about Light Horse Harry Lee's his father, that was Orthodox, and translated some. I can't remember what the text was. I have to look at his essay. Translated some Russian Orthodox text into English. And then also there's a debate over whether or not the Greeks whichever group came to St. Augustine that founded St. Photius's national shrine there, whether or not they were Catholics or they were Orthodox. And according to the national shrine, they were Orthodox that went there and founded that colony.
Yeah. And
that would have been prior to even the founding of the United States.
Yeah, you have to remember that post fall of Constantinople, right? This is 1453. Constantinople falls. You have this, the Greek diaspora just heads west, and a lot of them, land in modern day Italy.
Yes.
Which then also, of course, spurs the Renaissance and whatnot. There is actually, it's not very well known, but there is a theory that Christopher Columbus is actually Greek.
Really?
He's of Greek descent. I don't know how widely I've heard this, right? The Italians, of course, claim him. I know this would be, scandalous to Italians, and but his lineage is, there's some question about actually, his family heritage and so forth. But 1453, and by 1492, right, you have explorers going out, and within that contingent, you have Greeks kind of helping, because they're a seafaring people by and large, and so they're involved in the founding of the New World and exploring it. But they're embedded within the Spanish or the Portuguese or those groups. They're not taking a leadership or a predominant role or so forth. They're not the ones remembered in history. They're not, the De Sotos, that get named things. So, but the Greeks are here early in Florida. Of course, the Russians are there in the 1790s in Alaska, and they come down the west coast, right? Fort Ross is the furthest southern Russian trading post, and it's in Northern California, right north of San Francisco. And there, it's a state park or a state park, and there's a Russian Orthodox chapel that's a part of it. And on 4th of July, the Orthodox clergy and faithful go to Fort Ross, and they shoot off the cannons, to celebrate 4th of July. My brother-in-law, who's a priest in LA, has made that trip many times up to Fort Ross for 4th of July, So you have a Russian presence in the Northwest coming down to San Francisco and that area and further. The first martyr in the New World is an Orthodox convert who was an Aleut, I believe.
St. Peter?
St. Peter the Aleut, and the Franciscans, basically, the Spanish with Franciscan missionaries, kind of capture them off the coasts of California and, try to convert him. And in the process of him refusing and telling him, though, that he's a Christian and so forth, he's kind of mutilated and ends up dying. So you have that, but these are kind of isolated incidents here and there.
Right.
Of course, the first convert to Orthodoxy that we know of is Philip Ludwell III.
Yes, that was the one that Father John Whitford just wrote about.
Yeah, and he's a very fascinating, but he converts at the Russian Embassy Church in London.
Oh, okay.
Is where he converts, but he inherits through marriage the Green Spring plantation in Virginia, which is the largest plantation in Virginia. He sits in the House of Burgess as a member. He's secretly Orthodox because it was basically illegal to convert to leave the Anglican or the Episcopal Church at that point and hold a position of government, right? He's involved in the legislature, and he's also involved in getting a young military officer his first commission. That man's name was George Washington. right? Thomas Jefferson writes a letter to the Doge of Venice, vouching for the morality and the uprightness of one of his daughters to marry one of the nobility from Venice, right? So, and he translates liturgy from Russian to English. So
that was what I was talking about.
Yeah,
was he Light Horse Harry's father?
So yeah, he would be a descendant of Philip Ludwell III.
Okay. Yeah, I should know more about this. Philip Ludwell is my first cousin, so I should know more.
So the Ludwells are the first kind of converts. They're mixing in the circles of the founding fathers and so forth. But again, it's this so small minority, and of course the Orthodox tradition, right? Is impactful upon the founding of the country. You have to remember that it's the Russian Empire that kind of holds a neutral position,
right,
in the time of the revolution, that is impactful basically upon the colonies, the new country being able to kind of support itself in trade and so forth. It's the Russians that we have to remember that during the Civil War, European powers took sides. The British and the French sided with the South.
Yeah.
The Russians sided with the North. And so they kept the ports open for the North.
Yeah.
And the Russians then after that period, they sell Alaska, right, to the U.S. Intentionally, so that the British don't acquire it, right?
Russia was actually wildly important to the founding generation. Thomas Jefferson wrote, there was talk about sending Andrew Jackson to be an ambassador to Russia. And Jefferson, he completely rejected that notion. He's like, no, if Andrew Jackson was over there, Russia's going to become our enemy. And we can't have that. They were wildly important.
John Quincy Adams was our ambassador to the Russian Empire. And then he's the son, right? The son of is it John Adams? Yeah, John Adams, his son, John Quincy Adams,
yes,
right, who becomes president also. At one point, he was ambassador to the Russian Empire for the United States, I believe.
Yes.
Right? And so our history is very much written from a Puritan perspective, which looks at the kind of the British inheritance, and biases it. And largely that's, an early 20th century kind of switch. The British are not looked upon favorably throughout the 19th century by Americans, by and large, right? The whole Monroe Doctrine is to tell the European powers to get out of North America, right? And so, so the Russian Empire had a much more kind of favorable view, up until, basically World War I and the communist takeover of Russia, right? That's really when things changed. But also, kind of our special relationship with the British, that's a very much early 20th century kind of invention that dominates our politics and so forth. Well,
that would have a lot to do with why we got involved in World War I in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Because there wasn't really it wasn't like you had Nazis at that time. So there wasn't like a real ideological reason to side with the Allies over Germany.
No. Yeah, World War I is a whole mess.
Yeah.
In terms of the telling of its history and why it occurs. And but our kind of pro-British perspective, right, is really a 20th century phenomenon. Before that, the United States as a whole is very suspicious of Western European powers. They played a hand in the Civil War of kind of, again, divide and conquer. If we can get the South upset with the North and then we can dominate. We can kind of come back to our colonies and dominate. So we kind of forget that history. And I tend to feel like the things that within our history that put us into camps, right? Divide us, that these things are dangerous. That there still is a lot more that we have in common as a nation than we have that's dividing us. But again, certain aspects of, one culture gets heightened and kind of amplified and pitted against another, right? You have to make sides, right? And so that's why I point out that, in upstate New York, in the countryside, right, there's more "don't tread on me" or Confederate flags, right? Because than there are in the South when I was there, driving through northern Mississippi, So it's important that we remember that, and as we kind of think of our own history, that it's how do we find commonality, and also diagnose what's the problem, right? Because back to the kind of the essay that Alan Tate is writing, there's a lot there of the mechanization of society, the commodification of society, right? That is an accurate diagnosis of the problem, not just for the South, but also for everywhere else in the country as a whole. And that the unrooted nature of people's existence, that nobody's from anywhere, right? That's one of the strong points of Southern culture, is there is this natural attachment to a place and a love for a place, right? That then makes you feel responsible to that place. But if you're never from anywhere, right, you're never responsible to anything other than yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, kind of that Puritan, the Protestant work ethic, and the emphasis on progress, right? When the Puritans detach, right, from the scriptures, from tradition as a whole, but they have this ideal of progress and this ideal of being able to progress and make things perfect, right? Make this utopian ideal, the city set on the hill, right? Mm-hmm. But that they can put that city anywhere.
Yeah.
They can go anywhere to make that happen. It's like it's not about us here in the north in Concord, Massachusetts. That's the message for everywhere, right? And therefore it becomes toxic, because if you become the authority pushing this out, in a sense, instead of just establishing that in the place you live, right? You're trying to impose that everywhere else. That becomes the toxic part of the culture.
Yes.
That then dominates a lot of political discourse, right? Throughout the nature of what that society should look like shifts and changes, right? How the Puritans of the 1600s saw it was different than how they saw it of the 17th, and then how they saw it of the 18th century, and then the 19th century, right? It shifts, right? Because of this idea of progress, that we're progressing, and as we learn more about the material world, somehow that gives us a better perspective on how society should function, right? But that's Alan Tate's criticism of the the view of religion of the half horse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just if you're only dealing with the materialistic aspects of reality, right, you're missing half of the picture. And that's where they go off the rails into all kinds of weird, ventures. And you have different strains of this throughout, but it's still the same kind of spirit of, we know best, you should listen to us. Yes. Whether it's, with about slavery, or it's about transgenderism. You know,
Yep.
the same spirit moving to impose their perceived perfection of society, right, on everyone else through political or economic or military means, you know. And the rest of the country eventually, you know, for a time, some aspects will go along with that, but then people just kind of get sick of it, and then there's a backlash. And that's the pattern of our history. You know, after the Civil War, everybody got sick of the Puritans and the Reconstruction era plans that became dominated by, you know, some kind of the Puritan thinking once Lincoln was assassinated. Right?
Yeah.
And the project got hijacked, and everybody else started saying, "Hang on, this is not what we died for."
Well, yeah, and one of the most famous, like the most famous heroes of the Old West is Jesse James, who was famously a Missouri Confederate guerrilla fighting against the Yankees in Missouri. And he's like he has more written about him than most presidents. Like, he was a hero of the entire country for his symbolic resistance to that Yankee Puritan thing that everybody got so fed up with.
Yeah.
And on the topic of progress, we just last week actually we did the essay. Was it Lytle's essay on the philosophy? Lanier's essay on the philosophy of progress.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he talks about, and it's actually talked about earlier on in this book too, is that the progressivism was not something that was just sort of invented by the New Englanders. It was something that was just ingrained in Puritanism. And in an earlier essay, they actually talk about the reason that Puritans started to reject or progress beyond the Bible was actually over the slavery issue with people like, you know, Robert Louis Dabney, that were defending slavery from the Bible. And the New Englanders, they basically just gave up trying to remedy or reconcile slavery in Scripture. And they said, okay, well, we're just done with Scripture then. Scripture's wrong. We're moving past this. And so this progressive idea where they become the sole arbiters of truth, and what they believe is right is what's right. And that continually changes because they have no ultimate foundation for what is right.
Yeah.
And that's how the Southern agrarians say that they progress beyond Christianity.
Well, yeah, because religion is, or even the scriptures were mechanistic to them and utilitarian. They were like, if we can't use scripture for this end that we want to accomplish, then we're just going to throw out scripture.
Yeah, because they create in their minds the ideal.
Yes.
Which, you know, if kind of if we go back to what the real philosophical split is here, it's a split between realism versus nominalism. Where and this is a medieval kind of departure in West, you know, the emergence of nominalism, where in a sense you're the one who gives names to things, or in a sense you're the one who defines reality, as opposed to the realist who says, I recognize, I see what is real. I don't define what is real. I'm recognizing that these things that are real exist outside of me. Whereas the nominalist says, no, I'm giving definition to what is real and naming and bringing together the things that I see into coherent parts and so forth. And I'm defining reality myself. I'm naming it. Thus the nominalist. Yeah. And the Puritans are nominalists, basically.
Yes.
They're the ones giving, in a sense, definition to what is, in a sense, perfect and ideal, and therefore they're, you know, this is what they're after to create, as opposed to you still had that kind of more realist influence within much of the South, because the Episcopal or the Anglican tradition and the Catholic tradition, right, still still retained much more influence from a realist philosophical perspective, because all of the early church fathers, all of the, you know, the pre-schism Christian tradition is very much from is realist in its in its outlook. And so anybody who was still attached some way to that retained this more kind of realist, perspective, and basically Tate makes this point in the essay. Let me see if I can find it.
Is it right at the beginning of chapter 3 that you're looking for? 'Cause I was thinking of that earlier. He talks about the difference between the Eastern and the Western mind.
Right before that, at the end of 2, he says this: it is irrational to defend religion with the weapon that invariably discredits it. And yet this is what seems to be happening. I am trying to discover the place that religion holds with logical, abstract instruments, which of course tend to put religion in some logical system or series where it vanishes. The person is the logical mind who gets to define and systematize and give definition, right? This is the nominalist philosophical tradition, right? Yeah. That's there, and he makes the point. It makes, in a sense, religion vanish. It destroys it. If that's what you're going to use to defend it, right? Then the thing you're defending is going to be obliterated, right? And then in chapter 3 he goes on, but this is due to our nature, which is very different from that of the Russian or Eastern European mind, whose religion is quite simply supernaturalism, or the naive religion of the entire horse, right? Not the dissected horse cut in half and analyzed.
Should we back up maybe and kind of explain what he means by that whole horse, half horse thing? I feel like the listeners are going to be confused by that.
Sure.
If we don't talk about it. So chapter 1, he talks about the religion of the full horse and the half horse. He says right at the beginning of chapter 1, he says, for abstraction is the death of religion no less than the death of anything else. Religion, when it directs its attention to the horse cropping the blue grass on the lawn, is concerned with the whole horse and not with that part of him which he has in common with other horses, or that more general part which he shares with other quadrupeds or with the more general vertebrates, and not with, 2, that power of the horse which he shares with horsepower in general, of pushing or pulling another object. Religion pretends to place before us the horse as he is. So he's talking about like the difference between seeing the thing itself and seeing what it can do for you practically, and saying so the religion of the half horse would be the thing that looks at the horse and says, oh, here's a thing that pulls stuff for me.
Let's dissect it, understand it from its parts, its power, its this or that. It's how can we grasp it and use it to our advantage?
If I may, because we were earlier, I think we were throwing around a lot of words like nominalism, idealism, realism. Just to kind of give context to the nominalism thing. At one point, there was a big debate between nominalism and idealism. And to use the example of the horse, nominalism believes that there is no such thing as like universals. They don't exist in reality, right? So you see one horse and you recognize it has 4 legs, it has a mane, it has a tail. And then you see something that looks similar to it and you say, oh, okay, those are the same things. Those we're going to call horse. And then you see another horse, different color, different size. And you say, oh, that looks like a horse, right? Oh, a pony, that kind of looks similar to a horse. We're going to throw it in the same group. Idealism, like, what we see in Plato or to an extent in Aristotle, we see that the horse exists abstract from the physical manifestations of a horse. So a horse exists in the ideal world, and we recognize what conforms to that ideal, however imperfectly it is. So that's kind of and so where he's getting at is like, you can dissect, what is the, it has 4 legs, right? Is it a horse or is it a dog? And it's kind of working up then from that ground, right? From it working from like a chair to God rather than from the ideal down to the imperfect physical manifestations of those things.
Yeah, what you call the ideal is also called the realist.
Yes.
The realist perspective.
Yes.
Where a horse,
universal categories are real.
Yeah. That in a sense, and that from the Christian perspective, right? Where does the horse come from? The horse comes from the mind of God.
Yes.
That's where the universal exists.
Right.
It's in the mind of God, but that doesn't have some existence like Plato thought,
Right.
somewhere in some realm. It's more of the along the lines of Aristotle's kind of understanding that the ideals have a practical manifestation in the world. They don't exist on their own, right? But they're, and the Christians and the Jews as well, saw in what Aristotle was saying that was more in line with Genesis, right? God spoke from his mind. He called into being the thing that was in his mind, right? And so in the Orthodox tradition, you have the tradition of the teaching about the logoi, so the thoughts of God, right? And then God calls them into existence, right? And so, so as a Christian, you see a horse, you recognize it as a horse because you are made in the image and likeness of God, and you're recognizing, in a sense, the thing that came from God's mind, and it's manifesting itself in this particular instance as a horse, right?
Yes.
You're not saying, oh, this has 4 legs, this has this, you're not creating the categorical system by which then you start placing things into a system and defining it, right? It's a different approach, and that's the whole point here that Tate is getting at.
Yes.
Is the half horse, right? Is this scientific, materialist, nominalist approach to things, whereas the traditional Christian religious approach is the recognition of, oh, that's a horse.
Yes, and it might seem like it's a distinction without a difference, but it actually makes a difference. Like when we're talking about transgenderism, when we're looking at people, right? You could just say ignore sexual organs or what chromosome somebody has, and you could go ahead and find unity in, you stand upright with 2 legs and 2 arms, and you have eyes and ears and a nose, right? And then other than that human being is interchangeable with other manifestations of the human being. That's different than recognizing man and woman as 2 universal categories that are different from one another.
Yeah.
So it isn't just a difference or distinction without a difference.
Well, I think even the attempt to describe man and woman in terms of things like organs and chromosomes is already because a lot of the right tries to do that. They say well, a woman is, somebody with 2 X chromosomes, but they've already fallen into that trap of thinking because they're defining it in terms of the characteristics
of the categories, the characteristics, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, right, and that's Tate's point. If you're going to argue based on that line of reasoning, you're going to lose.
Yeah,
because because the contours of the debate is being defined by your adversary.
Right.
And that's, in a sense, this is what Tate is expressing, right? We're talking about religion in an irreligious context.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm coming at this, right, from an irreligious, not humble perspective.
Yeah, he knows it.
And so no wonder it disappears. It fragments, it dies because, right, I'm coming from it based on assumptions that are given to me, in a sense, by my adversary. And how can I win that?
Yes. And that's a really interesting point. The South constantly, and I think conservatives always get caught on the back foot in these conflicts where they're always trying to work from the paradigm of those they're opposing rather than putting forth any positive policies or any positive ideologies or understandings of anything. They're always trying, the atheist wants to deny God's existence because of the lack of their having seen miracles. So we're going to go ahead and prove that miracles exist through historical data. Like there's, obviously, yes, we can prove miracles exist through historical data, but even just submitting to the atheist paradigm in that case is that's the issue there.
Yeah.
We don't have
and then you
to
get
play
things
by their rules.
And then you get things like the Missourians in Kansas, who resist in these lowbrow ways that end up being painted as bad.
Yes.
By the people whose frame that you've already bought into.
and who are doing the same exact things as they are, right? You know, the Jayhawkers are doing the same violent things as the Missourians, right? But they're the ones who are able to control the narrative, as people say today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? And therefore frame it in a way that's beneficial, right? You know, the whole issue of John Brown, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of the Jayhawkers, Father, have you been to the updated Kansas History Museum?
Yes.
What did you think of it?
It was, you know, visually stimulating, right?
Yeah.
Wrestling things presented well. The execution of it was fine, but at the same time, the choice of what you highlight, right, is somewhat disconcerting.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that stood out to me the most as being just kind of like, why would you do that? You had the white medical jacket of the Kansas Surgeon General equivalent, basically the head health official, on display. The jacket that he wore during COVID when he was, had to get up and make presentations and all this stuff. That is now a historical artifact that you're going to put in the museum. I just was like, I thought, wow, this is, I don't know if we have enough distance from COVID to really weigh whether that's something I want to see.
Yeah.
Value that's the jacket that this guy, because we're still kind of weighing the whole response to COVID. And, it's like, it's something that's still going on.
Yeah. It's not even history yet.
We're still trying, Dr. Fauci.
But but that's what you choose, to display, you're just kind of like, oh, okay, I don't know. I will say, though, that, I have been contacted by folks from the Kansas Historical Society there, about history of Greeks in Topeka. And, they've been fabulous in the information that they've provided and so forth. So I don't want to be overly, critical. But, it was just funny that that's what they presented as being important to be viewed.
Yeah.
There's so much other things that I would think, be more important. But,
Well, I think it kind of plays into this whole idea where they, the people currently deciding the narrative, they aren't. I guess the most concise definition of conservative we could give is people that look back to the past, recognize they're in the present, and look to find continuity between the past and our future. And the people currently in charge of the narrative don't have any interest in that. They don't have any interest in what actually came before them. They have interest in what is actually happening right now. And then they have interest in making what's happening right now the guiding principle for the future. So you see this all over the country. Like, we were just in D.C. Last year, and every Jefferson's Library of Congress, it's just full of just liberal nonsense of the narrative they're trying to push, and they don't have any interest. It's like, okay, it's just a historical fact that white Europeans built the 13 colonies and built the United States. That's a historical fact. You can't get around that. And they don't care about that history. They just want to rewrite history that, oh, well, it was built by, African slaves, and African slaves are now kind of that present linchpin that history turns on. And that's what they're going to talk about in the present. Mm-hmm. And I think it plays into the way they deal with, like, scripture, for example, where they don't really care about scripture unless it becomes useful for them in their narrative. But they don't have any interest in keeping continuity.
No, but even the whole question of how did African slaves, how were they, what role did they play in the founding and the establishment of the country, its growth and its whole history, right? That question is an important question.
Absolutely.
To ask and to consider, but it's not, that's not what's going on.
Yes.
It's the historical fact of that there was slavery is just used as a means to get to the progress they want.
Yes.
Right? It's not a reflection on the actual historical reality of what's going on in the interaction, right? Of all these cultures, right? Because even white and black is a modern construct.
Yeah.
Of description, right? You get asked, "Are you white?" What does that even mean? What does black even mean? Right? Those are important questions. If people ask me, "What are you?" I tend to say, "Well, I'm a Southern Californian."
Yes. That is exceedingly important.
That's a cultural expression.
Yes.
And I have met people with much darker pigment than me who are also Southern Californians. And we understand each other.
Yes.
Because we're from the same, cultural background and the same place. We're from the same place. And the place has a very important impact on the person, right?
Yes.
So much the color of the skin.
This is I don't know how much time you spend on Substack, Father Nikolai.
Not much. Sorry.
Yeah. This was actually a really big debate a while ago, and I wrote an essay on this exact topic that got a lot of controversy, and it was called "The White Race: A Reductio ad Absurdum." And the point of that was showing that you could take all of these global races that we consider white, whether it be British, German, French, and you could put them all together in one place and they would still fight with each other. Because at the end of the day, the global white race isn't actually a thing that unifies us. And this parochialism is actually a far better binding principle, that where we're from and who we live with is more important than, say an ancestor 10 generations ago.
Yeah.
And I think that was a difference that the North couldn't understand with the South, right? Illinois banned all emancipated blacks from moving there. So, okay, well, in one case, it's like they didn't really deal with blacks that lived in Illinois. That wasn't really a thing for them. They didn't have, slavery wasn't prominent then. They didn't have a big black population. The South did. And so it becomes something that's a much greater question for the Southerners, where it's like, well, these people are a part of us. Yeah. We can't just free them and then leave them to die. They're a part of our people. So we have an obligation, a moral obligation to care for them as our kinfolk. And what do we do? What do we do here? They, a lot of them can't read or write yet. How are we supposed to just emancipate them and send them out, either deport them to the West Indies or Africa and leave them to, the Africans who they're no longer African.
Yeah.
They're something fundamentally different. They're Southern now. What are we supposed to do with them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the thing that keeps coming around in my mind is that the plight of specific groups is it's not that there's a care for those groups. It's that those groups can just be used as a means again for progress to a specific kind of ideal, and then that can be imposed top down on everyone, and so groups are chosen because they are able to be seen as promoting or making progress in this goal, whatever that is. And this applies not just to race, but socioeconomic groups, to the poor, to the homeless, right? We talk about the homeless and people use the homeless again as a means of getting elected, or as a means of pushing a narrative or a program or a project, right? And in all reality, it never really deals with homeless people.
Never.
Because dealing with homeless people is hard.
Absolutely.
You go out and you got to talk to them. You got to deal with them one-on-one. It's a one-on-one problem. And it's a problem of a specific place. It's not something you can solve with a policy.
Yes, not even only at a national level, but even at the state level.
Even the state level.
California is a good example.
Yeah, and so on the level of a city, you can start to grapple with it. Mm-hmm. But most cities, what they do is they just bring in, consultants to give them a plan, and then they try to implement the plan, and it doesn't go anywhere. And then they bring in a different consulting agency to give them a new plan. And because what it takes hiring people to go out and interact with homeless people.
Yes.
It's hard to do, and you burn people out, right?
Yep.
And it's just hard. But the idea that we can kind of eradicate homelessness or eradicate addiction or eradicate poverty or eradicate, right? Again, these are progressive utopian ideals.
Yes.
And so the instead of dealing with the reality of you, in a sense, there's always going to be homelessness. There's always going to be addiction. There's always going to be these problems, which is a traditional religious understanding.
Yes.
How do you live with that reality?
Absolutely.
What do you do in response to it? That's what the gospel is. The gospel isn't telling us how do you get rid of these things. It's telling us how do you deal with them. You're always going to have the poor, Christ says.
Yes.
Right? Well, how do you treat the poor?
Yes.
Right?
And this is
treat these people. And it means you have to interact with them.
Yep. And this is a really interesting during the founding generation. This is something when Thomas Jefferson, he writes, he pleads with the nation and with the state of Virginia to establish his idea of the wards, which are a very small, it's smaller than a county. It's like about 5 square miles.
Yeah.
And he pleads with the state that we need to establish these wards because this is the only way that we can deal with the homeless, the sick, because it's not the government can't do it. What needs to happen is churches and communities need to go and they need to treat their own sick. Churches need to collect alms to provide for their own poor in their local communities that they have day-to-day interactions with. Yeah. And he pleads with the country for that. And it ends up, of course, getting rejected by the nation and by the state of Virginia. But that was something he fought for until he died. He continued to talk about the wards in his writing because he saw that the only way that you could adequately deal with these problems was through this face-to-face interaction, through these people being a part of the local community.
Yeah. But that the problem there, though, is that the Protestant Reformation destroys, in a sense, the cultural or the societal structure of Europe.
Yeah.
Where the parish church is the focal point of a given region of a city or a community or a place, right? And that the church was the thing that dealt with societal problems.
Yes.
It established almshouses. It's the thing that created hospitals in the first place.
Yeah.
It's the invention of the church invents hospitals,
yes.
in the history of the world, right? And in a sense gives us the modern medical profession that we have today, right? That didn't exist in the ancient world. And and the thing that happens within the Protestant Reformation is one of the first things that occurs when a country becomes Protestant is they seize all of the structures that the church has other than the parishes.
Yes.
The monasteries, the hospitals, the orphanages, the almshouses, right? Whether it's Sweden or Germany, the principalities in Germany, England, right? When you did this, right, you seized this from the Catholic Church, right? But the Catholic Church, they had those kind of things because that was a common heritage of ancient Christian culture.
Yeah,
right? You had that structure in the East as well. And then the government never was good at taking care of those things.
Right.
And so, but Jefferson is sitting there in a reality post all of this. Mm-hmm. It's not his fault that's what happened, but he sees the problem. But the United States, right? We don't have a unified Christian heritage. It's fragmented.
Yes.
And so we continually have this difficulty of how does the various denominations, along with the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, right? How do they live together and interact with each other in this place, right? And at the same time, the tradition of the Puritan tradition of we need to create a program. We have a solution. We can progress, right? It's this continual internal conflict between the nominalist progressive ideals that change every generation new plans, right? New things to implement, right? That never solve any problems, right? But you have that strain, and then those who have some attachment to traditional Christian norms, right? These things are going to be continually in conflict in our country. Basically, city governments and state governments, whether they're Republican or Democrat, are very much influenced still by that Puritan kind of progressive ideal.
Yeah.
Do you think that's why we see this push towards secularism
Well, that's
in the
exactly why I had that.
especially in the 20th century, 21st century, where because the religious tradition of the nation was so fractured to begin with, the progressive answer to that was just to get rid of it completely and do something else. Like, don't be religious anymore if we can't.
Well,
if we're so fractured.
A religion that's so denuded and watered down and generalized that it's really almost meaningless, right? But it's not just the United States. It's also Western Europe, the European nations, because the ravages of we have to remember the Protestant Reformation brings on the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, all the religious wars, right? It's Protestants and Catholics and Protestants fighting with each other.
Yes.
And secularism, the secular space arises out of, in a sense, a necessity to how do you get people to stop killing each other?
Yeah.
There's a real need for that, unfortunately, right? But then when it comes, right, when the Europeans settle the New World, right, they bring that understanding of the dangers, right, of religious conflict with them. And so they establish a nation where there is no state church as a means of trying to solve this problem of religious conflict. So it's a even though they're all highly religious, it's
the secular thing ends up being a new religion of its own in the end.
So civil religion has emerged as its own religion, right? And in many ways, you can make a very strong critique of the current kind of political situation and its kind of re-embrace of Christianity. It's only embracing Christianity in its civil religious form. It can only go so far in the culture. It can only, before you have to have these boundaries on it, right? It can't be confessional. It has to just be kind of generic. But there is no generic Christianity.
Right. Yeah, and this is a point that even R.J. Rushdoony makes in his Institutes of Biblical Law, where he talks about the myth of neutrality. And he argues, of course, from a Protestant perspective, but he argues that neutrality doesn't exist and some religion or some sect of Christianity has to dominate. It has to. And if Christianity is not going to dominate, then something else has to dominate. But neutrality is a myth. That's not going to work long term.
Yeah, something takes the lead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
something takes the lead, and so, but within American tradition, that something changes, right? So you have periods of kind of that Puritan progressive spirit, secularized spirit that dominates, and then you get pushback, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's in our most recent history, that post World War II, the kind of the rise of the evangelical movement was that pushback.
Right.
People forget that from the 1870s on, you had a really kind of irreligious span, right? You thought the Roaring '20s were bad,
Yeah.
That late 19th century was full of debauchery and immorality and irreligious, excess, right? And so you get these pendulum swings, right? And so the evangelical movement is in a sense a response to the kind of that roaring, but the evangelical movement itself is a more kind of generalized Protestant, it's a new denomination, a new kind of thing. It's not the ascendancies of Baptists or Methodists or Presbyterians. Something more generalized kind of has to emerge, that is embodied in figures like Billy Graham.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I
speak to the culture, but he doesn't establish a church.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of you and Jesus, kind of altar call, the emergence of the altar call and the born again experience,
yes.
right, which predominates American religion, that you have this kind of conversion experience.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I grew up with.
Dominant aspect of American religion, which is not historically dominant within Christianity, that you all have to have a conversion experience.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's very American. So Billy Graham was able to kind of tie these things kind of together and cobble together kind of a coalition, a religious coalition. But that's largely kind of spent.
Yeah. And it's somewhat worth noting, it's outside of the scope of this topic, but it's somewhat worth noting that like Billy Graham was on the CIA payroll. Now, why that's the case, that's outside of the scope of this, but he was, right? Like the government had an interest in what Billy Graham was doing.
Yeah.
And why that's the case.
Yeah, many such cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. Earlier, I had mentioned when you just said that like evangelism being a reaction against something, I had mentioned earlier Lysander Spooner. And he was just one case. You have other famous American philosophers like Josiah Warren that were explicitly atheists that set up whole colonies in America that were atheistic, that were communist in nature. I mean, Paul Kingsnorth talks about these colonies in his Against the Machine. He talks about a lot of these American colonies and sort of this idea, this American ideal that different sort of beliefs or religions could kind of have freedom to just sort of establish themselves as communities and do what they wanted. And I think Kingsnorth kind of talks about it like it's a positive of the American political structure. But it is true that we've had, since post Civil War, we've had numerous colonies set up that were founded by atheists, that were communists, that were socialists. And a lot of that has guided the way that we, like Lysander Spooner founded the first private post office. He's kind of the founder of the modern day USPS.
I don't know history.
Yeah, so we have a lot of those cases where like evangelism being a reaction, like you said, this wasn't an isolated thing. This was something that swept the whole nation. Whether it was it transcendentalism or whatever that northeastern religion was?
Yeah.
Or
Emerson and Thoreau.
Yeah, or Mormonism.
Thoreau was a big fan of John Brown, by the way.
Yeah, he was one of the Secret Six, right?
No, he wasn't one of them, but
okay.
He did make a speech in defense of him just before his execution.
Yeah, but you have these again movements. America is full of religious movements, right?
Yes.
So you have the first and the second Great Awakenings. Those are responses to other kind of religious movements that are religious in the sense of moving away, secularizing, right?
Yes.
Right. The emergence of a more secular or atheistic or materialist kind of bent, right? But then you have a response. So it's always this back and forth, and right. And so, we've seen, especially since the 90s, a very much secularizing movement that's now kind of, it seems like it's crested and now falling. But the thing that's sweeping in, right, in many ways, at least within, the media, right, is a much more kind of just Christian civil religion. It's not confessional in any nature. But outside of that kind of what's being depicted within the media, you have, this movement towards more traditional Christian forms, whether that's more, the popularity of the Latin Mass and the Catholic Church, the influx of people into the Orthodox Church, and more, and even various Protestant groups that are just more traditionally grounded, let's say.
Yes. Now this leads to two questions. One of them is actually a popular question that was asked for you, Father Nikolai. But the first one is because it's become kind of a hot topic, especially recently with like Tucker Carlson having Father Stephen DeYoung on and then having Jay Dyer on. They've been talking a lot about like the secularism being itself a religion. So like what are kind of those defining characteristics that define a religion? Like what are we talking about when we say religion?
Well, the word religion itself is very much a modern. The way we use it is a very modern concept, right? The term itself was used historically for somebody who was a part of a monastic community.
Okay.
They were a religious adherent, right? That there was a specific way of life that they practiced, right? The pop cultural reference that kind of gets to this is from The Mandalorian.
Okay.
Right? The Mandalorians, they have this, this is the way.
Right.
Right? That whole kind of thing. This is the way. This is the way we as Mandalorians, we live. Right? That's religion. That's religion in a sense of that word. Now, that's not exactly the same thing as Christianity or the church, right? You have Christendom of the ancient world where the Roman Empire had been baptized largely into the church.
Yeah.
But that world then breaks apart in the 11th century, or begins to break apart in the 11th century, with cracks in it going back into the 800s and further, between Western and Eastern Mediterranean worlds, right? The Latin-speaking world versus the Greek-speaking world. But it gets, very much accelerated with the 11th century and the the emergence of papal supremacy, right? But in that time, in the 11th century, nobody would talk about that. Nobody would have understood the term Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox.
Right.
Yeah.
Those as concepts, right?
Yeah.
Weren't being used, right? Were you a part of the canonical church, right? Was your bishop in communion with all the other bishops of the church, or were you a part of a schismatic group, right? Of which there existed, right? So you had, in a sense, within Christianity, you have the church, and then you have fragments from that, right? And we live in the reality of the fragmentation of that, largely. That begins in the 11th century and then accelerates in the 16th century with the Protestant Reformation, right? So we all live in that context, that kind of, we didn't make those choices. We didn't choose these things. But we live in the fractured reality of it. And so, but we've created terms like religion, right, to distinguish and to categorize, define, different sets of belief and so forth. And so, in some sense, the more accurate way to speak about it is, who do you worship?
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
Do you worship the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, one in essence and undivided? Right? Or do you worship, something else? And that's how the people in the ancient world thought. Who is the God that you worship? They didn't use the term religion.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Religion applied to what you did.
Yeah.
How did you live that out?
Yeah. So this would be somewhat anachronistic, but from what you're saying, it would seem like if we, if we propose to an ancient Greek or Roman that the altar of Zeus was exchanged for, I don't know, industrialism or the US dollar, they would just kind of assume that the US dollar is the God that you're serving.
Yeah. Yeah, the God that, which is the criticism, right? That back,
Right.
Tate makes is, he says, a religion of the half horse is preeminently a religion of how things work, and this is the American religion, right?
Mhm.
How things work. We have a goal. How do we work towards it? And so, religion becomes useful if it moves us towards the work that can be done towards our goal. Right.
Okay.
And so that's how it, but the thing that's that takes precedence is the goal, the ideal, again, the
Right.
utopian, right? And that's endemic on both kind of, Republican, Democrat, spheres. They're both kind of operating with that same model, right? So right now, Christianity is conducive towards the goal of making America great. So we're going to let it kind of come out and, right, not because it's necessarily correct or true, but because it works better than wokeism or communism or whatever ism, right? Right. But the goal is the thing that's predominant, that takes precedent, and Christianity is the thing now that is going to make us more productive towards that goal. Right.
Yeah.
So, but that's the in a sense the nature of the country we live in. Right. And so the for us the response is, well, how do I live but not according to that system? Right.
Yeah.
I live here. I'm still a citizen of this place. I'm supposed to love the place I'm in. I'm supposed to be like, Christians aren't revolutionaries historically, that they don't go to try to create a new government system, right? The traditional way of Christian evangelism is you baptize the thing. You don't create a new thing. You go into the place, you baptize it. Not dominate and completely up, throw everything up, and change it. So you make it holy, So from like an Orthodox perspective, right? The goal is always not utopia, but holiness. And to be holy means that you deal with the realities that you're around. You deal with homelessness. You deal with addiction. You deal with the sorrows of life. You don't assume that they're completely going to ever go away, or that you can, in a sense, solve them. Because all of those things exist because people have free will. You can't change that. You can't get rid of free will. But that's basically the utopian model, right? The progressive model is submit to my will and everything will be fine. I know best, so follow my will, whoever that is, whoever the ideological Pied Pipers are. Follow me, do what I think, and everything will be perfect, right? That, of course, never works out because people have free will. They eventually rebel.
And then in the worst case, you get things like Jonestown.
Yeah, you get Jonestown, you get cults, you get wackadoo kind of things.
Yeah,
but the traditional Christian understanding is, there's no utopia here. There's no progress. There's only the movement towards holiness. But the movement towards holiness is the dealing with the fractured and broken reality of things and bringing peace to those as best you can, to be a light in the darkness, right? The darkness isn't going to be completely obliterated, but you're supposed to bring light into it in the specific place that you live. And in traditional Christian societies, nations are founded around saints, around holiness. That's how they're founded, not around ideals or philosophies or whatever,
Well, and around people, right? Like actual people.
Well, but the saint
being the saints
becomes the focal point of the people.
Yeah.
right? He becomes the father or the mother of the nation, right? So you have the oldest examples, right? Of course, Israel, right, is founded on Abraham, a holy man. He's the father of not just one nation, but many nations. He's not only the father of Israel. Israel is his grandson, Jacob. But he has many other sons, in a sense that some of those nations don't exist anymore, but some of them do, right? Right? So Ishmael being the one of his sons that founds a nation, right? So, but from a traditional Christian understanding, right? A Christian nation is founded, in a sense, on the blood of the martyrs, on the blood of the saints, right? Saint Nina goes to Georgia, the country, not the state, right? And she's in a sense seen as the founder. Like, you had people who were Georgians, but Saint Nina is the evangelizer of those people, and in a sense brings them together, right? And forms them into a coherent people through her holy life, that those people endure to this day. But it's the foundation of holiness that nation is built on, right? The same is true of Serbia, Saint Sava, right? He's all these southern Slavic tribes. It's Sava or Saint Sava who is the one who brings them together into a true people that endures to this day. You could say this of the Bulgarians, of the Northern Slavic peoples, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, right? You have, and even of Western Europe, right? Many of those peoples, right? Those that become nations, right? Their history goes back to, in a sense, a founding holiness, a saint or a group of saints, right? Or a history of sanctity, right? That's the thing that holds them, or that roots them in a place as a people. That then that history endures going forward, right? And so I think the most difficult thing that we face in this work of the church in North America is the transient nature of our life, that we move so much, right? That we're not rooted in a place.
This was, someone had recently just sent me a video of one of the earlier sort of far right founders in the French far right. But he actually argues against this idea that, like the French Revolution, for example, used internal immigration to destroy local communities. And America has done largely the same thing. We've used internal immigration through things like railroads, and then, of course, the development of interstate highways to wreck local communities. And one of the effects that had in the French Empire and then in America has been obviously the uprooting of people, right? Like, oh, I can just get in my car and move across the country and have the same or better quality of life, et cetera, et cetera. But what you're leaving behind would be that rootedness of your family having lived there for generations, of your church having been there. And those are the things which obviously, France during the French Revolution was Catholic, but they were deeply, communities were still centered around the parish.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that when the revolutionary government came into power, they tried to destroy those local parish communities, which sometimes spoke their own languages. They had their own cultures and traditions. They worked on their own calendars.
Yeah.
And the French government, under King Louis, he tried to preserve those things as a Catholic.
Yeah.
But when the atheist government came in, they tried to direct those through internal immigration.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they had a program.
Mm-hmm.
They had an ideal that everybody needed to conform to.
Right. Yeah, and the local parish community is not conducive to that ideal.
No, it wasn't. So, I'm not opposed to railroads and cars per se.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's the technology that's the problem.
Right.
It's the people and how they use it.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
agrarians make the same point. Like the theme of this whole book is agrarianism versus industrialism, and they're like, you know, we're not. They say in here at multiple places, you know, it's not that all industrial technology is bad. Like, we don't want to be Luddites.
Yeah.
But they're talking about what the centralizing thing is, and how it can't be, you know, feeding the machine for its own sake.
Yeah, when some other motive becomes the goal, right? Something outside of, you know, the things that you can touch with your own hands, right? Something far away, right? Then, in a sense, everything can then be used that's within reach towards it, right? If the thing that's most important is, you know, the national policy or some ideological policy, right? That's up high and far away, right, from daily life, then everything of daily life has to, you know, can be used and submitted to that thing, even if it's to its detriment.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to living in the place, being rooted in the place that you're in, thinking about what's best in that place, and the people that are there, right? Therefore, there can't be, in a sense, the same kind of uniformity or submission to a uniforming goal, right? You have to take into the contours of the land and the place and the people and all these things. So, and technology can then be useful if it's being used to the benefit of the place and the people, right? That's the whole theme, I think, of when I read Wendell Berry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that he's making those points. And there's a sifting, right? You take a technology and you weigh it, you sift it, right? Is this of benefit? Is this good? Should we use it this way or should we use it that way? You know, to what end will it, if we use it this way, will it bring, right? Because progress of some kind is our goal, our national goal, right? Therefore, if we can do it, we should do it because it'll bring some progress, right? That's different than a traditional Christian ideal, right? The goal is the kingdom of heaven, and how I live in a place is determinative of if I'm making progress towards that kingdom. You know, the tangible things of what is right in front of me, the little things. Am I being faithful in the little things, right, that are at hand? And to my neighbor who lives next to me, right? Right. The neighbor isn't the poor person in the country far away who's starving. That's not your neighbor. The neighbor is the person you see and you can touch, right? That's who you're supposed to, first and foremost, you know, be thinking about, right? Because you can actually do something for them. Unless you get in a boat or a ship and you go over somewhere to help somebody, that's different. Then they become your neighbor, or you become their neighbor, right? That's difficult. That's hard. That's right. Those are good things to do, but you know, in the gospel, the neighbor is the person right next to you.
Yeah. This is a really interesting. I've been wrestling a lot with this specific topic and the way that technology has affected our understanding of our community and our world that we live in. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I've been consistently talking about is, you know, under these empires of old that we really do just sort of idealize, like the Byzantine Empire. Local communities in the Byzantine Empire, they enjoyed a very, very great degree of sovereignty under the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, right? Like the Byzantine Emperor didn't have an IRA that was going and enforcing taxes on the outskirts of, whatever community that we would consider like, the backwoods, right? That community enjoyed a great deal of sovereignty where they could just kind of disregard what was happening in Byzantium itself. And I think that one of the great detriments of technology has been making us all citizens of the metaverse, where we all, because we can communicate with each other and we can, in a sense, understand each other, an American can understand what's going on in the mind of a Chinese person in China. We kind of have this sort of sense of neighborhood, which is global now and disconnects us from our neighbor across the street.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting topic to kind of dive into, as to the effects that technology has had on the way that we conceive of the world and where we live.
It also easily silos us into groups or spaces of like thought.
Yes.
Right. Or politically or ideologically, or, and you and instead of having to interact with people that you live around, you only interact with the people who have the same exact understanding or conception of this or that issue, right? And you selectively choose it's not community.
Right.
But that's what you call it. Your online community, which is not a community, but you're only coming together with the people who agree about this or that issue, right? That's not real.
Right.
It's not real. Real life is what you get in a parish church, where you're standing next to people, right? And you live in the same community, right? Or you go to the grocery store. That's your community. Those people are part of your community, whether you like them or not, right?
Yes.
But as a Christian, you're supposed to love your neighbor.
Yes.
And the life of holiness is having to how to deal with those differences or disagreements with your neighbors in your real community, right? That's how someone makes progress in the spiritual life, is striving to love their neighbor, right? And love their enemy in their community.
Right.
And again, to the extent to which we do that is the extent to which we, in a sense, establish or lay a foundation, a truly Christian foundation in the place we live. That's how it works.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed, being sort of entrenched, I've been increasingly trying to remove myself from it, being entrenched in kind of the online far right circles, is you have these people that will praise Hitler or Mussolini or Stalin, even to the extent where it's like, oh yeah, we should persecute those who disagree with us. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, what you're thinking of disagreeing with you, though, is like a Muslim in Iran that's disagreeing with you. You're not considering that your next door neighbor may be the one that you're, executing. That places all of this in a completely different context. When it's your community that now you are actively trying to, persecute or kill because of political disagreements, that places this entire paradigm in a different light. We now have to think about these people differently. And if you don't think about it differently, that's probably a sure sign there's something fundamentally wrong with the way that you're understanding the world. And go ahead, Father.
The way that certain voices are amplified, I find highly suspicious.
Yeah.
Because it just feeds again into this divide and conquer way of operating, within the United States. As a priest, I am supposed to be a peacemaker. I'm supposed to be one who brings people together, right? Who solves conflict, right? And it seems to me that often the most extreme voices of contradiction are the ones that get amplified the most. So as to, and again, create this false dichotomy, North versus South, right? Slave versus free, as if these are monolithic camps per se,
Right.
that have nothing to do with each other, right? And I think that but that's, those voices get attention the most, right? They get people to click. They get people to go to the website. They get they make you money. They make you money, which is the primary mode of operation, right? In our culture, the making of money. And so, unfortunately, that's the context we live in. But it's not good ultimately for us as a people or a community, right? To be divided, right, into these false dichotomies, right? Rather, it's more important for us to actually know each other in our own communities and to live with, and to work with each other. Even if we get irritated at each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and we have to forgive each other. Yeah. We have to apologize. Right. That is all in a sense, the means by which good things happen in a place, is because people try to live with each other. They make mistakes. They apologize. They forgive. Right. That's how a traditional Christian society works. Right.
Yeah. And this, I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but it seemed, I would probably define the proper understanding of like a society as being the extension of the family, right? It starts with the family, that family extends out, and they become the broader society. And ideally, a society should function largely the way a family functions. And not at all times you can agree with your cousins, right? Your cousins you could vehemently disagree with. You're not going to persecute them because you disagree with them.
Yeah.
You're just absolutely not going to. You're still gonna live with each other. You're still gonna, drink a beer together. You're still gonna hang out with each other at Christmas parties.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of like the mass transport and internal immigration that we see, it wrecks that idea of continuity and family. So like where once we had Thomas Jefferson writing to John Adams and stating, oh yeah, we disagree with each other on tons of stuff, but at the end of the day, we're still the closest of friends.
Yeah.
You no longer have that where it's like, oh yeah, I disagree with my neighbor. Now I view myself as something fundamentally different than them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is and again, it's those are obstacles or things that are difficult. But again, because we use transportation, we move around so much. Again, why? Because the making of money is the primary goal of society.
Yes.
Right? That's the primary goal, to get rich. And so we go to where we think we're going to get rich. We change jobs, we do this, we do that. That's always, the consideration. And it's a long-standing, ingrained tradition in our country to do that.
Yes.
The Meyers family, I can get back into the late 1700s with my patrilineal line going back to Pennsylvania. But roughly every 50 years, the family moves.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania to Indianapolis to LA. Every 1800 Pennsylvania, 1850 Indianapolis, 1900 LA. Right? And then after that, we didn't stay in one place in Southern California.
Right.
There's no specific home, a place, a city specifically that we stayed. It bounced around. Right? And that's largely the nature of our culture. but it has these side effects to it, right? And you know, and I'm the, you know, the victim of it as well as you know, it's, you know, I don't live, I'm in Kansas now. I'm not in Southern California, right? That's where I find myself.
Yeah.
So, you know,
What do you think of the way the church in America sends priests to different places in relation to this? Like, that's not, is that, I can't imagine that's how it worked traditionally, right? Like, wouldn't you have had a priest, you know, in the early church or in the first millennium where a priest was raised up from within the community, like ordinated from within the community?
You have to remember what a diocese is, right? Upon which the church organizes itself administratively, right? You have a bishop over a diocese, right? In the old world, a diocese is geographically a much smaller unit.
Yeah.
So even in the, you know, I'm a part of the Church of Antioch. The old world diocese or archdiocese, right, are largely around cities. You know,
how big is your diocese, Father? Like what geographical region does it span in the United States? Just to give context.
From Texas to North Dakota.
Wow.
Up
yeah,
the whole center of the plains.
Wow.
The Great Plains, this is our diocese.
Yeah. We're in Jackson. My church is in Jacksonville, Florida, and we span from Fort Worth, Texas, the diocese to the south for the OCA.
Yeah. So
huge
the
region.
Size in North America is huge geographically compared with the old world. You know, so within a diocese, you would have one bishop. That bishop could get to every parish of his diocese, you know, in a sense, from wherever he is, it wouldn't take him a day's drive, right? He could physically get there. Whereas here, you're flying. You have to fly everywhere, right? You know, so the plight of the church in North America, one is it's jurisdictionally divided along various lines, administrative lines, you know, to old world ethnicities and places of origin. And so dioceses are huge to bring in, you know, to have enough parishes within a diocese or an archdiocese. And the geographical size is, you know, encumbers the administrative function of the church, basically, in a traditional way.
If I may ask, Father, how often does the bishop come and visit your parish?
I've never had a bishop visit my parish.
Oh, wow.
Since 2019 is when I got here.
Wow.
Because we had COVID.
Right.
And then after COVID, our bishop retired. Now we have an Episcopal vicar who's here once a year or twice a year. Right? So I've had, in a sense, the representative of the bishop here numerous times in the last 3 years, once he was appointed.
Oh, okay.
But again, he's having to span a distance from Texas to North Dakota.
Right. Yeah. And that might not even be that many actual physical parishes.
Well, you know, there's probably around 50 to 60 in our diocese.
Right.
You know, so he's hopping, he's busy. Right.
Yeah.
But if we didn't have jurisdictions that were overlapping in the United States, right, you could have in my situation, you could have a bishop of Kansas. And there would be enough parishes, roughly, in the state for him, you know, to oversee. Or it would be a significant enough structure, right? You know, it might be Kansas, southern Nebraska, and Western Missouri or something like that, but it would be a much smaller geographical space. And then, so traditionally, right, a priest serves in the diocese he's from, right? He might not serve historically in the parish he grew up in, but in the diocese. But if the diocese is like the greater area around a large city or a county, what we think of a county, or maybe 2 or 3 counties size, that's the size of your diocese, right? You're not going far from home.
Yeah.
Right.
In the New Testament, when St. Paul writes the epistles to each of the churches,
yeah,
do we understand those churches to be kind of like the central parish in a diocese, like the church at Galatia, right? Like when he writes the epistle to Galatia,
that's a region. Galatia is a region.
And do we understand that region to be sort of what we now understand to be a diocese? Or is that a little bit larger or smaller?
No,
or whatnot?
In terms of the ancient church, yeah, the diocese,
Okay.
that would have been a diocesan-sized place. And
Okay.
of course, this diocesan structure is just taken up from, the Roman Empire,
Okay.
right? But it's just a way of dividing regions to govern, right? If you're going to have a bishop of a place, right, he's a bishop of a city, and the greater area of that city usually, right, is the diocese. And then you have, as time goes on, you have archdioceses, where you have a bishop now of a region. He's the major city of a region, and then you have dioceses within that archdiocese, right, where the bishops of outlying areas are, right? But it's the same structure, basically.
Okay.
Whether you call them metropolitans or archbishops, right? You have the bishop of the big city, and then the bishops of the region, and they have a local synod, right?
Okay.
They govern that region. Like you could call it for us, a number of counties or so forth historically, right? But you have to remember, like, the state of Syria is the size of like Kansas or Nebraska.
Yeah.
That's something that I don't know if people fully grasp the size of the United States of America.
Yeah.
It's giant.
Remember, they're walking on foot from Jerusalem to Damascus, and
Right.
from there to Antioch,
Yeah.
right?
So,
And
to
so-
walk across foot from San Antonio, Texas to even Lubbock, but like if you go further to like Amarillo, Texas, that's months that you're walking.
Yeah. So the size of the ancient, of these regions in the Mediterranean world, right? If you overlay the United States, on Europe, you're going, California's over near England, right? And Washington, D.C. is in Russia
Right.
or Ukraine. It's like the geography of the United States is massive compared to, the ancient world,
Spain's darn near the size of Florida.
Yeah. So, modern day Turkey, right, is, the length of Tennessee, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is one of the interesting figures like Thomas Jefferson. They didn't even like Western expansion. They viewed Western expansion across North America as being different sovereign nations. Because I don't think that any reasonable person could understand that a territory as vast as ours, from Maine to Alaska, could be one homogenous country. Those are vastly different cultures.
Yeah. Well, but it's possible because of the states. In a sense, each state functions like its own country within, because we used to call it these United States.
Yes,
absolutely. Right? The federal government had specific function, right, on a national level, but each state kind of functioned on its own, and they cooperated, right, with the.
It was very similar to like the EU is today. The European Union or something.
I don't know. In some ways, I guess, but in other ways, the but the thing that made the United States work is the common currency,
Okay.
the economic structures,
Right.
Whereas you have one bond market in the United States. In the EU, you don't have that structure. That's part of the problem of the EU.
Right. Britain
You
rejected
don't
the
have
euro.
a common. They're trying to impose a common economic structure on a group of countries, right, that don't want to work together necessarily.
Yeah. Now you have the rest of the EU on the euro and Britain on the whatever Britain's on.
Right. So the economic interests of Greece are not in line with those of Germany, but within the EU, they have to be.
Right.
And so, that's it. And each country has their own bond market, but they're all economically, connected with each other. And they all, and so, that's a whole nother issue. But the United States is able to function even though it has these different regions, right? As long as America works, as long as everyone's allowed regionally to live and let live, in a sense.
Right.
It's again when a unified, uniform, homogeneous plan is always from top down, pushed down to every region, right? That you get the pushback. We need federal control, national control of all this stuff, right? That's where, in a sense, local needs have to give way to national policy or something like that. It has to.
Right.
It works fine when local control, local needs take precedent in most areas. And then in certain places, spheres of commerce and economics, right? Currency, bond markets, right? You have a uniform policy. But even then, right? Historically, when the Federal Reserve was established, there wasn't one interest rate. There are 13, I think, federal savings, part of the Federal Reserve System. 13 regional banks. When that was founded, each of them set their own interest rate regionally. It only comes later that you get one rate for the whole country.
That's interesting. I was unaware of that.
Yeah. So again, that's one argument why we do have problems, partly because, again, it's the tension between a national norm versus regional norms.
This was I actually just this week. I recently had to write an essay for school. I'm studying pre-law, and it was I chose to write on Horn versus the United States Department of Agriculture in California. It was a case that was heard in the Supreme Court on they were raisin farmers.
Yeah.
And there was a certain quota that was set by the United States Department of Agriculture that raisin farmers in California had to turn over a certain amount of surplus to the United States government to regulate interstate commerce and whatnot.
Yeah.
In 2002, 2003, this rate was 47% of their raisin crop total for the year. And obviously they refused to turn over the quota. And then when they took this case up to the Supreme Court after over a decade, finally reached. But yeah, I think we see this consistent centralization of the federal government that tried to essentially enforce what we could call a type of socialism or communism across the whole United States.
Yeah, and that's the tension that continually plays out, right, in the federal courts, right? States versus federal. And it's that working out of, and things go well when there's a reasonable dialogue about, okay, what do we need to have a national norm on, and what can we have as regional norms that can vary from state to state, or from county to county, or city to city, right? Like it's always the question of, at what level does this law or this standard need to enact, right? And the problem is that you have a strain, again, back to those Puritans, that think progress is bringing one norm, one standard to everyone, everywhere,
Yes.
in all places,
Yep.
right? And imposing that, and then the pushback is no, that doesn't work here.
Yes.
You know,
I think part of, like, even insignificant things you might think about, like food items. Like if you live in Georgia or Florida or probably California, you might enjoy cheaper citrus prices or peaches.
you should.
Than you might in like Kansas.
Yeah.
But part of this, like, you know, a Californian or a Floridian moves to Kansas or Oklahoma, and they're like, oh, well, we want peaches at a lower price, like we enjoyed back home. And this is kind of what this uprootedness, where it's, you know, if you live on a coastal region, you might enjoy warm weather fruits, versus if you live in Texas, you might enjoy steak at a cheaper price.
Yeah.
And that's a natural effect of living in a local region that we've tried to equalize and level across the whole region, across the whole nation.
But yeah, you get the same food wherever you go now. It's like, then you got Dollar General that just pops up everywhere.
Right.
Like there's
Yeah.
like my little town in Oklahoma has doesn't have a grocery store, but it does have a Dollar General, and every single town has a Dollar General.
Yeah.
But and you go in there and you find the same food everywhere. It's all the same mass-produced stuff.
Yeah. Like, what is Southern food anymore? What does that even mean?
Yeah. But it's, again, it's the disconnection from place and tradition in a place, right? Or basically from culture. You have a national culture that's, in a sense, dominating regional cultures. But that's unsatisfactory for, you know, most people are just, they don't, right? It's empty.
Right.
It's soulless, right? It's ugly usually.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Again, because these national norms, whether it's in fast food or whatever, right, are there to make money.
Yes.
They're there, and so we get you know, you walk into a McDonald's and you know exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Because it's a stamp, a rubber stamp everywhere. Boom, 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 boom. There's no uniqueness to it. Right. But then when somebody actually does walk into a place that is local and unique, right? Right. That's why there's all the, you know, eat local. There's all this rage about, you know, finding the local place, the local expression, you know, when you go on vacation, you want the local food that, you know, it's like people crave that. Right.
Yes.
But that doesn't make as much money as a national chain.
Right.
So what are you going to serve? The dollar, the money, or the local, you know, again, a true local expression of something, right?
Well, and then there's the further kind of building off of that, where you get these mass-produced things that try to appear like they're local.
Oh my goodness.
But really they're just made up. They're really just owned by the same people, like, you know, making the same money, but they're kind of branded as like home cooking or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. But again, because control has been centralized.
Yeah.
Right. That again, there's this pattern within American history, right? Of progress, of the dollar, but also of centralization or nationalization, right? And so money and power rises to an elite, to a central, right? A central source. And the care then is for that elite, that, and they're not attached to any place, right?
Yes.
They're attached to their corporation or their income or their, you know, their work.
Yes.
They're not attached to a place. And so all considerations is for the wealth generating function, not the place itself that you live in.
Yeah. And I have kind of two tie-ins here, actually, back to the agrarians. And the first one would be that when we look at like the way the planter system or the aristocracy worked in the Old South, it was uniquely rooted to a particular place. It was rooted to the land that the planters lived on. And so while, yes, obviously the planters sought to make a profit off of the tobacco or cotton they grew, that wealth was not distributed across the entire nation or even centralized to just their own family. It was dispersed among their community. So when a local plantation flourished, the community around that plantation flourished.
Yeah.
And we even see like a very sort of degenerated ode to this is like in Dukes of Hazzard with Boss Hogg. Like when Boss Hogg, when he's flourishing and his business is doing well, Hazzard County is doing well. And even though he's a corrupt scumbag, he still always has in the back of his mind that he's doing things for the betterment of Hazzard County.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that last degenerated ode of that we have.
Yeah. But it's the distinction here is between the good father and the bad father, right? The tyrannical father and the loving father, right? Because in all reality, men are to be fathers, women are to be mothers, right? And not just mothers and fathers of their family, but also of their community, right? And you had this still in the American tradition that we have this refrain of the founding fathers, not just of the nation, but even of a city. These are the founding fathers, and like when I lived in upstate New York, we lived outside of Utica. And it was evident that the city itself was still living off of the legacy of the founding fathers of the city.
Yes.
The infrastructure that they built, the things that they granted to the city, the museum they founded, the school, the cemetery, it's like where the founders are buried, in a sense, right? Again, it gets back to this idea that a culture and a place is founded on people. A Christian culture is founded on saints, right? But even a city is founded on a person or on persons, founding fathers and founding mothers, right? And you have this legacy, this tradition that goes with it, right? But it can only last so long until it's in a sense kept alive or reinvigorated, or the memory of it is kept, right? That then spurs and helps grow the next generation, right? When all you get is a homogenized national form of everything, there's no local fathers.
Yes.
Right? No, there's no local mothers. There's no neighborhood fathers or mothers.
Yes.
Like there's no, the lady up the street, who I grew up with, and she was like a mother to me, right? That's the thing that we're talking about here. That's what keeps, in a sense, civilizations going, right? That's what tradition is.
Mm-hmm.
The handing on from one generation to the next of that which you were given. But when you stop handing that on and you go and you grab something that's homogenized and secularized and generalized for a whole continent, right? That's kind of the plight. Everything's boring and ugly and mean, and it's like living off of cotton candy.
Yeah, and part of, I think, a good microcosm of that is seen in the fact that we no longer need fathers and mothers to maintain our economic production. We don't need American father and mothers. We can rely on like Mexican or Middle Eastern fathers and mothers to just import their children to our country to maintain our production. We don't actually need fathers and mothers of our own country, of our own people.
Which I would say you have to be careful there, because the nation is one of immigration. There's always been a tradition of immigration, but they're immigrating into something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? They come in, they take on the thing that's already there. They don't bring with them the thing that is from afar, right? Or that over. But there's also, though, in the American tradition, the ability to integrate, the new thing from whether it's the Middle East or Asia or wherever, there are, in a sense, compatible aspects of the immigrant culture that can be retained, but other parts that aren't. And that's the thing.
Yes.
Right? There are aspects that can be appreciated and retained, right? And in a sense, Americanized, like, the burrito is a wholly American invention, right?
Yes.
Whereas tacos are Mexican,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, but they harmonize so well together,
Yeah, and this is something I think it's either Shelby Foote or it's one of the generals that the general that wrote deconstruction and reconstruction. I can't remember his name right now, but he specifically made a point to mention that I think it was Stonewall when he went to go visit some friends of his. He made a point to mention that the cuisine that was given for dinner was a sort of mix of like this African,
Get her in there.
an African. I don't really know the way to describe it, but an African dinner mixed with like an American type cuisine.
Yeah.
And that was something that he made a point to mention, that it's not that it used the traits that were brought from like Africa, wherever the servants came from.
Yeah. I think that's part of what it means to be American is the kind of the bringing in of all of these things to a certain extent, right? It's, again, there's tension here. What do you let in and what do you have to keep out?
Yeah. Well, I've been reading Edward Gibbon. Feel free to roll your eyes at Edward Gibbon. But one of the things that he talks about early in the book is Rome was kind of the same way. Like Rome, especially at the beginning of the empire, they were very good at integrating all kinds of different peoples into the empire. And then part of what caused them to start to fall apart was the fact that they, instead of making other peoples Roman, they started to lose their identity as Romans and fracture into all these different, like the separate identities of all these people that they were trying to bring into the empire instead of making them Roman.
Yeah. Well, I think it's famously said about the Romans that the Romans were good at amalgamating cultures and the Greeks were good at creating culture. And that was kind of one of those key distinctions there. The Romans were really good at bringing cultures together and making them into one, but they weren't so good at like creating a distinct Roman culture that existed prior to different peoples coming into the empire.
Yeah, but then you have the baptism of the Roman Empire, right? And Gibbon is one who thinks the Roman Empire ends in the 5th century.
Yeah,
and that's a historical inaccuracy.
Yeah,
the Roman Empire doesn't end until 1453.
Yeah,
but it's the Roman Empire as it existed in the Greek-speaking East that continues for another 1,000 years. Yeah. And that's a Christian Roman Empire, right? And the modus operandi of that empire in missionizing was to take the gospel to the language of the people.
Yes.
Translate it into the language of the people you're evangelizing or who are being incorporated into your kind of culture and empire, right? It's the Slavic people are Christianized from the Eastern Roman Empire. They retain their language. They're given a written language, right? That's how they get a written language, because in their baptism, right, the scriptures are translated into their language, and therefore you have to create an alphabet to write their language, which they hadn't had.
This is where Cyrillic comes from, right?
So yeah, the Cyrillic alphabet, right? And so this is the norm of Eastern Christian missionary work, right? And it had baptized the Roman Empire, right? Which was a combination of Roman and Greek already, right? And it took those aspects and kept them, right?
Yeah.
And so the ability to take what is good again of a people and baptize it and shed off what is evil, right? That's the work of the church, right? But the empire had become a part of the church.
Yeah.
And so that's how it functioned.
Well, in this essay, in chapter 3, when he starts talking about the Western and the Eastern mind, he talks about scholasticism, and how it tried to provide a rational explanation for the mystical, and then he goes on to say the Eastern Church never really did that, it never. But I wonder if that has anything to do with those different approaches of being like top down and like imposing a way of life on the people below you, or having to provide this rationale for your beliefs versus having the way of life grow organically out of the people that are living there,
I think there's something to that in terms of the tradition of papal supremacy, right? Where you have this need to bring reform to the church in the 11th century, but the way to do that is a top-down approach. And that marks Western European culture in a way, and creates a dynamic of conflict, right? Of who has the authority, in the sense to be in charge, to do this, the kings or the Pope, right? And that leads into the Protestant Reformation and so forth, of which we're inheritors of all of that. But in the East, right, you don't have this conflict between the king and the bishop, right? There's a sense of symphonia, as they call it, or symphony, a cooperation. Each has their sphere of responsibility where they work together, right? To govern the society in a place.
Yeah.
And that's acceptable, that there's, difference of culture and language and so forth, right? It was the norm that, it's funny because in the West, in the Roman Catholic tradition, the norm was Latin only. Now it's like, we can't have Latin. It's kind of ironic that that's what's going on now. But the norm was Latin only. And that was part of the conflict, that the Slavic people saw when they came into Christianity was, if you embrace Christianity from the Germanic missionaries, they're going to make you learn Latin.
Yeah.
But if you embrace Christianity from the Eastern Christians, you don't have to change your language. So that's kind of marks the history of Central Europe as well. But this kind of need for uniformity is a very Western kind of Western European obsession.
Tate says the Western Church established a system of quantity for the protection of quality, talking about the scholastics. But there was always the danger that quantity would revolt from servitude and suppress its master. So that's like the idea of this rational explanation that you provide for all the because you feel the need to justify all the mystical things about Christianity. And now the rationality that you built up around that is going to take on a life of its own almost, and suppress its master, like just take over from Christianity in the end.
Yeah. The means become the goal.
Yeah.
Right. And the things of the now, the present means, become the goal, not the kingdom of heaven. Right. But the progress of the now.
Yeah.
As if you can perfect everything here, right? With some uniform standard, But so yeah, he seems to just be kind of at a loss. He can identify the problems, but he doesn't know what to do with any of it.
Yeah, I think that's probably why he sounds so depressed in the introduction. It's almost like, I don't know if you got this impression, but it sounds to me like he almost doesn't want to be writing this.
Yeah.
It's like he's upset that he has to write it.
Yeah. He makes this point in chapter 4. He says, for the social structure depends on the economic structure, and the economic conviction is the secular image of religion. Which is a very astute point, right? He says, no nation is ever simply an unequivocally beaten in war, nor was the South. But the South shows signs of defeat, and this is due to its lack of a religion which would make her special secular system the inevitable and permanently valuable one. You know, like that the religion affects, in a sense, what the secular system is the economic system, right? Mm-hmm. Right, and that the economic system is downstream from religion. Culture is downstream from religion, right? And politics is downstream from culture, right? So and so that's the right, because the economic pursuit is the religion per se of the United States in many ways, right? You get this, religion has to, in a sense, take second seat to the first religion, the economic imperative, right?
Yeah.
So, thus, Christianity has to kind of secularize. All religions have to kind of secularize. Buddhism, Islam, right? Hinduism. Like, if you express those religions too purely, that goes against, in a sense, the economic religion of the nation, right? And it's going to cause problems. But if you dilute them and make them subservient, in a sense, to the economic religion, then they can coexist.
Yeah. Well, and they also stop being what they are.
Yeah, they become something new.
Yeah.
So, and that's a challenge for we as Orthodox Christians, that we don't conform ourselves again to this world, but are transformed, right? That we don't worship first the dollar before we worship the Holy Trinity. You know, and again, it's how do you evangelize the United States? Again, it's dealing with these tensions, wrestling with them, and trying to love your neighbor in a given place, right? That is the answer that then brings about, a foundation that's tangible that can get built on, right?
Yeah.
It's the struggle of trying to be faithful to Christ in a given place, right? That's what lays a foundation, right, for the change of the society as a whole. It all starts local.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, I was going to ask, what do you think of Tate's answer in the last couple of pages? He says the setback of the war was of itself a very trivial one. So he's saying the war itself was just a little piece of this greater civilizational conflict that the South is involved in. And then he says, we are very near an answer to our question. How may the Southerner take hold of his tradition? The answer is by violence.
I think you get to
what
that.
What is he talking about? Like, what?
You come to that because you don't have. You're disconnected from the gospel, and ultimately,
yeah.
from right? He's still, again, what is his goal of Southern tradition, right? What is it that he's after? Which is not clear to me, but the violence being the answer, right? Just seems that he's still stuck in the same kind of structure that he's saying is wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Well, that's also kind of the problem of the agrarians in general, I think, is that one of the points they make repeatedly in here is that agrarianism is kind of a nebulous thing. Like it's defined almost in opposition to industrialism.
Yeah.
But they can't ever tell you what agrarianism is except to say that it's the local flavor of wherever you are. And they can't give you a system to tell you how you should do it, because that depends on where you are and who you live with.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
again,
kind of it plays into that same problem.
agrarian versus industrial. is
Yeah,
another
false
dichotomy,
dichotomy.
right? That doesn't necessarily even have to exist, right? It's how do you, as a people in a given place, function in such a way as to be beneficial to your place, and some of that might necessitate industrialization in some aspects and agrarian, in other aspects, right? Here in Topeka, Kansas, it's a huge agricultural economy, but at the same time, you still have to make things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you, at this point, right? How do you do that? How do you provide goods to people without some kind of industrial manner?
Right. And how do you keep the agricultural base from becoming, because the fact that people are growing corn, that doesn't make the growing of corn anti-industrial.
Yeah.
You can turn growing corn into an industry, into industrialism.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the tension that they're wrestling with here, is how do you make an agrarian society, which doesn't just mean that the economic foundation of the society is agriculture.
Yeah.
It means that the foundation of society is localist, is rooted in the local community and families, because they recognize that you can turn agriculture into an industry just as well as you can, the iPhone.
Yeah, because the product of the agriculture just becomes an industrial input.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And I tend to think that the solution is always bringing control of those things to as low local level as possible, and that the danger is just like tyranny is able to manifest itself, right, when you can impose your will on a huge large population.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to be a tyrant in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right. But
Although some people definitely try.
they try, but eventually they meet their match.
Yeah.
Right. So
I've been blessed to never live in a place with a homeowners association.
yeah.
I've heard some horror stories.
Yeah, because those associations pull the power up for the whole neighborhood into this select group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That then get to have private meetings and make decisions and feel like they're important and live out their fantasies of power. But so the owner of the factory who lives in the same city as his factory is going to function in one way, as opposed to the guy who owns multiple factories who lives far away from all of his factories, right?
Right.
Right. One's going to easily become more tyrannical or destructive in how he manages those businesses than the guy who's seeing it firsthand. he has to touch it, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that so much power and wealth can get pulled up so high, right? That's part of the structurally, that's part of the problem of how we live, right? We're so far removed from, in a sense, what we own almost, or what generates our wealth.
Yeah.
Right, that you don't have to take responsibility for those things. You pay other people to do that for you.
This
right?
this is really interesting because it brings up a point that we've talked about consistently throughout this series. Is the agrarians, if you just read them like at a surface level, they seem to be very kind of left-wing, liberal, socialist, right? Like they're against the assimilation of wealth into some distant higher class.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff is, the democratic socialists in America would also, they would agree with it at a surface level that, oh yeah, Elon Musk probably shouldn't be a trillionaire. And so a lot of these talking points are kind of sound pseudo left wing when we bring them up, but obviously we're not meaning it in like the communist sense.
No, because they're just the opposite side of the same coin, right? They don't want the billionaires to control those things. They want themselves,
right,
to have that same level of control. It's just the question of who has control.
Yeah.
And I think what we're saying is control needs to be dissipated.
Yeah.
In a sense, locally, right? The more, you should have a responsibility over what's in front of you.
Yes.
Not what's far away per se. But
Yep.
that's usually how it works best.
Yeah.
Now, are some people able to manage things really well from a distance because they're able to find people to manage and so forth? Yeah, you have those exceptions. So it's not a one size fits all kind of thing here, but in general, local control, local business, right? Local stores that are locally owned are better kept, better run, and they meet the needs of the community better.
Yes.
Right? Than the big, massive, Walmart style stores.
Yeah. And this is, J.R.R. Tolkien was famously a monarchical anarchist. And then G.K. Chesterton, of course, with Catholic distributism. This is kind of the foundation of that, is that there's a certain element where individualism is sort of accepted, but not in like the Enlightenment individualist sense, but in the sense that every individual has the responsibility for their own property and their own actions.
Yeah.
And that sort of forms the foundation of society. So you get like G.K. Chesterton's 2 acres and a cow. Everybody should have 2 acres and a cow. Their means of production should meet their own family's needs.
Yeah.
And I think that's something the Southern agrarians are very, they're very keen on. And Paul Kingsnorth talks about it a bit too. He seems to very much appreciate the Catholic distributists.
But the problem is that doesn't work in a city.
Yes.
Where you live in a condo or an apartment complex, right? That's not going to work in New York City.
Right.
It's because you can't live on 2 acres there.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't think the church is against cities. But again, within a city, right? It has different, again, urban versus rural. What's going to work in an urban environment is not always going to work in a rural environment. And that's where you can't pit those two against each other so as to gain power. But then that's what, of course, happens, right?
Yeah.
It's the humble realization that, okay, we need policies that are urban and we need policies that are rural.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be identical, because of the nature of the way in which you live in a place, right? And so you have more urban communities that exist naturally out of necessity.
Right.
And you have more rural areas that exist because of what you do there. You need the space, right?
Mhm.
And so neither of those are better than the other per se. And in the scriptures, right, the kingdom of heaven is portrayed as a city,
Mhm.
even though the city is founded by Cain, the first murderer, right? The city is baptized and redeemed, even though the city is the place where it's easier to find vice,
Right.
right? So it's not that the city is in and of itself evil; it has its own temptations, right? And the rural has its own form of temptations. Again, it's the whole thing is striving to live a holy life in the place you find yourself, whether that's in the countryside or that's in the city, right? The tradition in the Orthodox Church is that you have monasteries not just out in isolated places, but you put them in the city too. Constantinople was full of monasteries. Some of the great monastic saints were urban monastics. Saint Theodore the Studite was an urban monastic saint. He wasn't living in the desert. So, but the manner in which the rule of prayer will change, the manner in which you live will adjust depending on where you're at. But the goal is the same, right? To try to live a holy life. But the place you are, in a sense, affects what you have to do there. And so there can't be one rule, one norm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And again, this is the problem of our political discourse these days, is that the presumption that one side knows better than the other about how everything should be everywhere. And that's national norms for everyone of one or another. And unfortunately, it's that is so because there's an economic reality behind it, right? Because you can make more money when you nationalize things, when you normalize things across the board, when you standardize things, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's from production or distribution or whatever, the more streamlined you get it, the more you can squeeze the economic, the dollar out of it. And so, right, again, because the dollar is the driving force.
Right.
That
Right?
makes me think of the imperial system versus the metric system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the imperial system is all based on your body, like the foot or the cubit or whatever it is, but the metric system standardizes everything to make engineering easier.
Supposedly, yeah.
So yeah.
Well, maybe it does, but I'm not an engineer, so I can't really say. But it's an artificial, man-made system.
Yeah.
Based on a chosen standard.
Yeah.
Right? Not something that's organic or per se real.
Yeah.
That's recognized, right?
Yeah.
By people.
Well, it's disconnected from your actual experience. Like everybody knows how long a foot is, roughly.
Yeah.
Because it's literally your foot.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so 10 centimeters, what's
yeah.
What's that? I can't tell you what that is in a sense.
Yeah.
I don't have a reference point for that per se because I don't live in that standard. But
yeah.
So I probably need to run, but any last things you want to cover?
I'll just read the very last paragraph of the essay real quick because I think this ties in with what we've been saying about how Tate doesn't really have an answer for this problem.
Yeah.
He says, the Southerner is faced with a paradox. He must use an instrument which is political and so unrealistic and pretentious that he cannot believe in it to reestablish a private, self-contained, and essentially spiritual life. I say that he must do this, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah.
So I think again, like he's too disconnected from the tradition himself to have an answer. And
Yeah,
he's just kind of at a loss to what to
politics
explain what to do.
The politics is the means of producing culture, is basically, I think, what he's saying.
Yeah.
We have to use the political system to produce the tradition or the culture, and that's an inversion.
Yeah.
Right. You first have the religion, the church, and from that comes the culture, and then the politics.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But he doesn't have a church.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the South and the North and the West, right, the East Coast, right, there is no church. That is the font from which the culture emerges, right? Because the church is the place where you go to have the common worship of God, the communal, right, experience of divine revelation, the place where time is sanctified and the meaning of things is expressed, right? The meaning of the material world, right, is given spiritual significance, all of this stuff. And that therefore, right, expresses itself in a culture that then expresses these things in a place and a time, right? The meaning of what's at hand in connection with what is eternal, right? But you don't have that.
Yeah.
You have multiple of those things that are, in a sense, somewhat competing with each other, and therefore they're pushed, all of those are pushed to the side, and the secular, right, is put in their place. And the secular is, the civil religion per se, the dollar,
right,
progress, whatever that means, economic growth, right, prosperity, right, these kind of vague things, right, that's the secular religion of the nation.
My GDP.
The GDP, yeah. And right, and it's because and so from that, that's why we have crappy culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We get pop culture, not real culture.
Yeah.
Because it's seen as the thing that's going to grow the GDP fastest,
right,
or be progressive, or make the most money, right? And yeah, that's why it trickles down into all spheres of life, dominated by the secular culture of the United States, right? And then it's only, you get, in a sense, the resistance to this in pockets, right, where a group of people, in a sense, rebel against that and build or produce something that's distinctly from their religious experience.
Yeah.
And it's distinct. It stands out.
Yeah, the Amish. The Amish.
Yeah, the Amish are a great example of this. But the Muslim community, building their mosques, right, in their own, right, the Indian communities, right, that are growing in the United States, right, and then the traditional, more where you find a strong Orthodox community, right, you have a very distinct culture.
Yes.
And a church that has a distinct architecture and a look and a rhythm of life that is distinct from the surrounding, right? And they're like little life rafts in the sea of secularism, right? That people find harbor in, right, and refuge in, out of the storm of this, of the sea of secular life, right? And that's kind of the place we're in, and you have competing rafts,
right.
The Mormons are one of those, right? They have a very distinct kind of culture and way of life, right? The Amish, right? And then, traditional Islam, traditional forms of Buddhist, they haven't taken on as much in the United States, right? But, they're there.
Mm-hmm.
They're grabbing people, right? Because they do have a little more stability than just the secular.
Yeah. And that seems to answer a lot of some of the questions that we got relating to like why Orthodoxy has been growing in the United States. That kind of seems to answer that question. It's the lighthouse on the hill. It's the firm foundation.
It has stability. It's rooted in something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It doesn't necessarily just move with the winds of secular culture, with the storms that blow around, right?
Yeah.
And so people find that refreshing.
Yeah, it's unconcerned with what the U.S. dollar or the GDP is doing.
Yeah.
It transcends that.
And so you're not driven so much by that anymore. There's something else that you can, in a sense, enter into. That's all, but it's transcendent.
Right.
It's not just the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it also expresses meaning and purpose, right? This is why this is meaningful. This is why you do this, right? This is what is, this is why you should have a family, right? Or get married, right? Or become a monk, right?
Yeah.
Like it gives you meaning,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just making money or fulfilling your desires, right?
Yeah.
That's more like eating cotton candy. It's sweet for a moment, but then it gives you a stomach ache, as opposed to, you go to the Orthodox church and you get steak, broccoli, and a baked potato, right? It's something that is much more substantial, that stays with you. You have to chew, you have to digest, you have to, right? It takes effort to gain from it, right? But in the end, you're satiated, you're satisfied.
Right.
As an analogy, right? So, yeah. But thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. This was really great.
Yeah, that was a great conversation.
We appreciate it.
A blessed feast of Our Lady's Dormition to both of you.
Yep, thank you.
Peace.
And see you later. Bye.
All right, we'll
Bye,
see you.
Father.
Well, you got any closing thoughts
No.
on the
No,
essay, or are you good to end it there?
No, that was a great conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. So I guess yeah, we'll end it there. I guess so. Tomorrow, we should probably tell the listeners. Tomorrow,
Yeah.
you got a debate set up with what's this dude's name?
I can't remember his name. It's something strange.
Nurgle Jones, I think it is.
Yeah. As far as I've heard, it's still on for tomorrow at what, like 4 o'clock, 5
Yeah.
o'clock?
4
Something like
Central, 5 Eastern.
Yep.
So
That
we're
should
doing
be
that. The prompt is, what is it? Was slavery was the primary cause for Southern secession?
Yes.
Is that it?
Yeah.
So that's the prompt. John will be taking the negative. The other guy will be taking the positive. I'll be moderating.
Yes.
It should be fun. So we might stay tuned. We might have another debate platform coming.
Yep.
But I'll keep that a surprise for now. The other thing is we started uploading as bonuses for paid subscribers. We started putting readings of these essays up as bonus episodes. So
Yes.
so I've been reading them, audiobook style. We got the introduction and 3 of the essays up so far. So just check Substack for that. You can subscribe for $5 a month or $50 a year, and you can get access to all the paid bonus episodes, or you can just read the book for yourself. It's on archive.org.
Or you can do a one-time donation through Buy Me a Coffee for each episode, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of any amount. So you're not, you don't have to. There's no cutoff for that. You can donate like $1.
Yep.
And get them. So that's that.
Yeah.
You got anything else?
No, I don't think so. When's the next episode?
The next episode will be in 2 weeks, I think. Is
Yeah.
there 5 Saturdays in August? There are 5 Saturdays in August.
Something like that. Yeah.
So our next episode will be in 3 weeks, actually, then on September 5th with who's coming on for the next one?
I'd have to check. I don't know if we have a guest scheduled for the next one.
It's the economics one.
Oh yeah, Neo-Puritan Observer said that he wanted to come on for that one, so we'll get with him and see if he still wants to come on for that.
Cool. So yeah, the next one will be Whither Southern Economy by Herman Clarence Nixon.
Yes. Yep.
And so yeah, well, I think I was gonna say it's gonna be at 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern, but we've had one single episode that's actually been at that time so far.
Yeah.
So who knows? Who knows when it's gonna be? But it'll be pretty close to that, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's about everything that we have to announce.
All right.
So hope the
Sounds good.
The face reveal was good.
Yeah. So
Tomorrow
thanks again. Yeah,
way.
thanks again to Father Nikolai for coming on.
Yes.
I think that was a really good conversation and a lot of good stuff to say about. I love the tie-in to nominalism that we went over. That was a really good point to be made there. And yeah, I don't think anybody else besides an Orthodox priest could have probably, gotten into the diagnosis of all these problems that we went into there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was a tough essay. That was a difficult one.
Yeah.
That was the hardest one of the whole series.
I did enjoy it though. Like I came away from it with pretty similar thoughts to like, I think he made an accurate diagnosis of a lot of things in the essay, but he doesn't have a solution.
No. Yeah, and I mean, how could he with especially with the way he was living at the time, but especially outside of the Orthodox Church, it's a really tough situation for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, and he's a victim of his time in a sense.
Yes. Yeah. Him especially. He was, the other authors agreed he was like the worst possible choice to write that essay. And he still did a good job, but it was difficult. I'm gonna listen to it again when you read it, just to try to hopefully finally fully understand that essay, because it really.
Well, everybody should listen to all of them just so they can hear my voice more. Honestly,
that's true. Yeah, Jason will end up narrating your life for you, be your conscience.
Is that the voice of your conscience in your head now? You just hear me talking to you in your head.
I think so. I think I'm pretty sure at this point. After 60-something hours of the Kansas series and then another 10 hours of the other one.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Yeah, we'll end it there and we'll see you in 3 weeks.
No, we'll see you tomorrow.
Oh, right. For the debate. Yeah, there's that. And then the next essay we'll see you for in 3 weeks.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that'll be on this channel. The next essay will be, or the debate tomorrow at 4 p.m., 4 Central, 5 Eastern will be on this channel. So
yeah, it'll be live.
Look forward to that. All right. We'll see you later.
Later.